Okay. False information from Yahoo groups and other internet stuff. Since it's an unregulated industry, there are a lot of people out there pretending to be experts who don't know their butt from China. And you've got to be careful who you're listening to if you're looking for information. And it's easy to get sucked in because people will pretend to be experts when they actually have no frickin' clue what they're talking about. I mean, you might ask something simple like the oil mixture ratio on your Simonini, and you would think someone would give you an honest answer, but these frickin' incompetent morons are out there and they'll tell you to mix it 50-1, blah, 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 where your motor's gonna blow up if you do that. So you've got to be real careful if you're on Yahoo groups or anything like that, that you're not getting false information or listening to people who have no clue what they're talking about. One way, I mean, it's hard to cut through that, but one way to cut through that somewhat is to watch a video of whoever you're listening to. So if you can see that they're an expert pilot, the odds are the information they give you is more likely going to be fairly accurate. But if you watch a video and they have no clue what they're doing, then obviously you don't want to be listening to them. Okay, false information from the USPPA. The USPPA is a nightmare, scam, death trap of hell and carnage. The reason is the way that scam works is these guys got together because the USHPA is where all the best pilots in the country came through. It's been around for about 40 years. The United States Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association. Well, they were getting all the business. So these idiots that have no certifications and don't know what they're doing kind of got together and decided they'd just make up their own certifications. Again, it's an unregulated industry, so there's no legal reason they can't do that. So the USPPA, they have zero training. They've never trained any instructors. They have, I mean, you basically got guys that have never had training and 6 months later are pretending to be USPPA approved instructors. And these guys put out books and videos and have no frickin' clue what they're talking about. So you have to be very, very careful. I would stay away from anything USPPA, like the PPG Bible is written by an atheist, antichrist, incompetent moron who is basically an intermediate pilot pretending to be an expert. So you get all of this information. Now, a bunch of it's good and useful information, but there's also stuff in there that can kill you because it's just freaking stupidity. So, you know, it's hard if you don't know, it's hard to decipher what's the good information and what's not. So it'd be like pointing someone towards a plate of, a table of food, and 15% of the food is poisoned and will kill you. Do you want someone to try and figure out which food is good and which is poisoned, or do you just avoid the whole table? So basically, I would just avoid the entire USPPA, everything they do, because you just don't know what's good and what's not, and it can get you killed. So very, very important to stay away from that. Okie dokie, don't tow with uncertified tow operators. The one cool thing about paragliding is you can actually tow up behind a boat or a vehicle, or they do like scooter tows, or you can even just hook a rope to a guy and actually pull him and tow him up in the air. Well, guys in the USPPA have died. They killed a guy just recently because they don't know what they're doing and they don't have the proper equipment. Well, the USHPA has a rating system for tow operators. So there are actual certified tow operators, and you do not want to be doing a maneuvers clinic or going towing with guys that have not had the proper training and don't know what they're doing.
Can I?
Yes, ask away.
They actually have a operation on the lake at my house for boat towing.
Okay.
What would be some of the things to specifically look for? From what I've heard, they're pretty good. And they have on their boat, I guess it's a rope that goes out like like a winch kind of thing. It
Right.
has different settings on it for different types of when the lead up pull, and then the hook up pull, and then 2,000 feet of rope, and then the rope parachutes down, and so it doesn't smack the water. How do you? Is there certain criterias or certain certifications that you can just see that they have on the wall to?
Yeah, I would just check and see if they're US HPA certified instructors with a tow sign off. If they're a certified tow operator with the United States Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association, then at least they've gone through some training. I mean, if I'm going to tow, I'm only really going to tow with the top pilots in the country so that they know what they're doing, because the tow operator can kill you, just completely just kill you dead. If they load up too much pressure, you know, it can lock out the glider, flip you upside down, and if they don't have a hook knife and have it set up where they can cut away, dump the pressure, they can freaking kill you dead. So make sure that they know what they're doing, and don't be out there with your buddy tying a rope to them, hooking it to the back of your truck.
Right.
There's more to it. It may look simple, but you got to be careful. It's not as easy as it looks, and there's a lot of things that we have learned from experience over the years on how not to kill people. So it's important that if you want to do that, just go through the training, just get it, or get with someone who knows what the frick they're doing. Okay, don't tow yourself by tying yourself to something. Guys have actually died doing that. Tied themselves off to a solid object in lots of wind, and then the glider like locks out, boom, pounds you into the ground so hard you just can't even comprehend. Because when you load up the glider, a glider has so much power it could literally pick up, you know, this truck. Your K2 could pick up this truck. So if they start towing you too hard and the glider loads up with 3,000 pounds of load, it could shoot into the ground so hard the energy would just, I mean, you got to understand, yeah, with that much weight on the glider, all of a sudden you hit the ground at 120 miles an hour on a paraglider that you thought would only do 25.
Wow.
So yeah, don't be tying yourself to a fixed object. You want to know what you're doing on towing. Don't fly old gliders or outdated paramotors. There's a lot of crap out there, older stuff. There's no reason to take risks. It's not worth your life. I would not recommend testing your buddy's glider if he's got some old thing and goes, hey, can you test this out and tell me if it's still good? I mean, if it's older than 5 or 6 years,
Can you send it to a place to recertify it then?
you can.
Okay.
You can send it in to recertify it, but if it's older than 5 or 6 years, chuck it. Don't fly it. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. People, I mean, there's another way that people have died. They're flying horrible crap, outdated equipment they don't know anything about, and that happens. There's no reason to do it. I mean, I personally, you know, if you've got a glider older than, say, even 4 years, you know, set yourself a limit. If it's outdated technology, don't touch it. Same with a paramotor. There are a lot of horrible piece of crap paramotors with catastrophic problems that could kill you. People die all the time from the exact same problems over and over and over and over. So you have to be careful, because you go flying around in your flat top, you're having a blast, you get 200 flights, you're like, yeah, this is great, no problem, do it all the time. And then you borrow your buddy's paramotor, and all of a sudden, you know, you have to get in the seat, and you have to let go of the controls to do it. Your brake goes in the prop, and it wraps up your brake toggle and spirals you into the ground, and you die because you didn't even have a reserve installed. So I would be very, very careful of the equipment you fly. You guys all got good equipment, and you're getting great training, so don't get overly confident, or should we say, don't underestimate other people's equipment, because it is not it's not the same thing. You got to use your head on that one. So don't be using old crap and stuff like that. Okay, fly the freaking glider. Here's one. People run into an issue and they forget to fly. They stop flying. This is big in general aviation and airplanes.
Right.
Yeah, you got some stupid light blinking that means absolutely nothing, and they're so intent on figuring out what that light is, they fly into a mountain and they're not paying attention. So fly the frickin' glider. Doesn't matter what's going wrong, what happened, your prop blew up and it's wobbling, you know, your engine fell off, fly the glider. Extremely important to fly the glider like a bird, because if you just, you know, crash on your own, that's just kind of stupid. I might have to say something about that. Okay, don't kite without training. People ask this all the time. You do not want to kite without someone who's competent, that understands, because like I was just saying, a glider has so much power it could literally pick up a truck. So if you get hit with a gust, you can all of a sudden be at 100 foot off the ground and you don't even know how to fly yet. Now you guys are going to be, you know, way above average in the industry, so people are going to be asking you questions and looking up to you simply because of your skill level and where you came through. So you've got to make sure you encourage people, do not touch that glider without someone who knows what they're doing. Like you were working with Drew, and that's good. Drew had awesome training, and so basically he trained you exactly what I did. Which is great. But another thing you want to make sure is that they know how to completely disable the glider. So in case you start getting drugged, they know to grab the toggles, run backwards, and know exactly how to disable the glider to save your butt. And if you're going to teach someone, you know, it's extremely important that you're standing right there when they're first getting started. And for like the first several days, you'll notice that I'm right on top of you and I don't like to even let you out of my sight. So if you do start to get out of control, I can dive on you and control the glider for you to prevent you from getting injured. So make sure you don't kite the glider without training, and you know, you discourage anyone else from doing that.
Now, how many people actually truly attempt to self-teach?
All the time.
Really?
Happens all the time. People go out, they buy a glider. Oh, I can just figure it out on my own. I get that question all the time. Hey, can I just buy a glider from you and then just go play with it for a while? And I'm like, no.
Really?
Don't do that. Yeah, it's quite common, so just be aware of that. Don't fly old gliders or outdated paramotors. I think we already got that one.
What's an outdated paramotor in your opinion? Is it necessarily the frame, or is it just a new top end?
What's an outdated paramotor? I would say any paramotor that has not solved all of the major issues is completely obsolete and outdated. Like the flat top has crumple zone to absorb energy in case you stall into the ground. Well-known problem in the sport. People have spine injuries and they die because in paragliding, if you screw up, the odds are really good that you're going to hit your butt really hard. And if there's nothing below your butt to absorb the energy, I mean, a fall from 6 feet could break your back and kill you. Where the flat top has 16, 18 inches of crumple zone, I have personally full stalled it into the ground being an idiot and got up and walked away from it. So if it doesn't have crumple zone, if it doesn't have protection from the prop, one of the biggest injuries with the incompetent morons known as the WPPGA is getting their hands in the prop over and over and over. People, I mean 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people a year chop fingers off in the WPPGA simply because they promote equipment that has not solved that issue. Where the flat top, you've got Kevlar netting, you've got a huge clearance between the prop and the netting. I mean, there are just numerous things done to prevent you from getting injured.
So outdatedness in what you're saying isn't necessarily, you know, you got a 3-year-old product that's in good condition, or you have your frame that's in great condition or whatever, but you have a wore-out engine, so you put a new engine on it and you're okay, and then it's quality equipment again.
It's more of the age of the design.
Okay.
If the design does not have crumple zone, if it does not have protection from the prop, if it does not have, you know, a quick release harness so you can get out of it if you go into water, if it does not have comfort bars in front of you to prevent a face plant, it's an outdated design.
Okay.
Because almost all the injuries you've ever seen are the same things over and over and over and over and over. The units that were designed 20 years ago, they still have not fixed the problems. So you could still get injured in the same ways over and over and over that we already know about.
Then what's the evolution of outdated equipment for flat top?
As far as, say that again?
Every 5 years they come up with a new evolution of
Oh, no, the flat top is updated ongoing. So the instant any update is found or any way to improve it, it is immediately implemented into the build cycle. So like, within days. And you could get 50, 60 updates per year.
So these units, in what you're saying, could, before they become outdated, they'll be 4 or 5 years old themselves before you need to probably look at getting the new technology in the motors.
Not necessarily. I see what you're asking, but the flat top has kind of solved all of the known issues in the sport.
Okay.
So I think it'll be quite a while
Before something changes drastically enough, before
correct.
The new version is outdated.
Yeah, right now we simply don't know of any major issue that can kill you on the flat top.
Okay.
It's pretty much solved every known issue, so it's as up to date as it can get. It might be 20 years before we can think of.
That's kind of generally what I'm trying to ask.
You got it, yep.
I'll be the one to ask for everybody all these questions.
You're doing good.
No worries, yeah, good. That's exactly what we want. So again, don't borrow your buddy's piece of crap paramotor equipment. Don't be lulled in, because when that many people a year get their hands chopped up in the prop, and it might be just something like a forward launch on a fresh breeze. A guy does a forward launch, gets hit with a little bit of gust, cage flexes right into the prop, boom, chops the hand off. It's ridiculous.
Really?
Yeah, so it's like,
how would that
don't
happen?
freaking fly
I don't
it.
understand how that would
You
happen.
get a gust.
Well, like on the Fresh Breeze, for example, the frame is so flimsy, you can, with basically 2 fingers, you can flex the cage and the prop together. So if you do a forward launch and get any gust at all, the risers will flex right back into the propeller, and the risers are in front of your hand, so your hand basically gets dragged back into the propeller.
Okay.
On a Fresh Breeze. So if your buddy goes, here, try my paramotor, and he's got a Fresh Breeze, the response would be, heck no.
Why don't you just try mine, because you'll be ordering one next week.
Exactly. Yeah, and you're rolling the dice, because there's so many of those things that we know that can kill you, or basically they haven't prevented any of the most common injuries. You're taking a pretty big risk flying something, because you're so used to not having that problem. It's very easy to get complacent. So you got to be careful about what equipment you fly. Okay, here's a good one for you. Stay near populated areas in case you do go down and need help. This is a pretty big one. You got to be careful putting yourself in a situation where if your motor were to fail, you end up 200 miles from any help at all. Up in Alaska, if you happen to go flying clear out in the outback where it's going to take you a month to hike out.
Shit, outback is just, a block down the road.
A block down the street, exactly.
This eliminates 99% of your state.
Yeah, so you've got to keep that in mind. When if I fly across country, I even like to stay like at the top of a mountain range, or stay high to where I can glide to some sort of a major area or populated area. So if I do have some sort of a problem, I can at least land near a road or a house or something like that. So that's a really good idea to keep that in mind, because you don't want to land safely and then get eaten by a bear because it took you a month to hike out and you didn't bring your Smith & Wesson 500 Magnum.
I don't leave the house without it.
You don't leave house without the 500 Magnum. Yeah.
I have the 500.
There you go.
8 3/8 barrel, and you have the last 44 barrel.
Bingo. Yeah, and if you're gonna be out, you know, where you're kind of borderline, you better be prepared. You better take your radio, your communication, satellite phone,
Yep.
get whatever you have to have so that you have a way to save your butt. Plan ahead. Don't be doing stupid stuff and end up, you know, in the freezing cold without proper equipment, you know, 40 miles
Shit,
from a
if it
town.
was the wintertime, that'd be the best scenario. Because anybody could get you within an hour or two on a snow machine.
Oh yeah, there you go. That's interesting. Okay, carry a cell phone or high-end radio so you can call for help if you need it. You know, and or if you're gonna be somewhere, if the radio's not gonna work, maybe a satellite phone or something like that. Be a good idea to try and be prepared in case you do go down somewhere. I mean, the longest I've ever walked was about 5 miles, where normally the motor I was flying would get 2 hours on a tank of gas. So I would fly 45 minutes out and plan for 45 minutes back, leaving myself a half-hour reserve, just in case.
Is there a reserve criteria and all this like there is a plane?
No.
No.
There's no, as far as, not like a motorcycle where you can flip to a reserve.
No, like you're supposed to have, you know, either a half hour or 45 minutes at night or full.
No,
reserve.
yeah, there's no set thing, but, you know, just be smart. Keep it in mind.
I'm asking.
How much is in there?
Yeah, you can look down at the gas tank, so you know what's there.
A couple guys up there have marks on their tanks. They put marks so they know how each mark lasts 20 minutes or whatever.
You got it.
But they just did a ride like 2 weeks ago up to the glacier, and he was on the trike.
Right?
And he ran it out of glass and landed on the glacier.
Oh my.
And they had to hike up there to get it out because there's no runway on the glacier.
Yep.
So all this stuff does happen.
Yeah, okay, so let's see. So you got it. That's exactly what we were just talking about. Okay. Tell somebody where you're going. If you're going to be flying somewhere, and it's just like, you know, you got an aircraft. So tell the wife where you're going. Hey, I'm headed here, and this is the general area where I'm going to be. You know, if you're flying near people, it's no big deal because you know, if you always put yourself in a situation where people could see you and could see you have a problem, then you're not going to have an issue. But if you're going to be going someplace where nobody really knows where you're at, you know, you could be asking for it. So obviously, you know, take a little thought, write down where you're going and leave a note, and just have some sort of a basic flight plan. You know, if you're going to be flying down the beach with hundreds of thousands of people, well, who cares? Because somebody's going to see you. But if you're going in the middle of Alaska, yeah, you might want to make some sort of a flight plan.
That being said, is it a common practice that you either fly by yourself often, or you fly with a buddy, or?
I almost always fly by myself, but I pretty much never put myself in a situation where I would ever have to walk more than a mile or so. Very, very rare.
But it's not like diving where they promote buddy diving.
Correct. Yeah, well, I mean, if you're going to be going someplace, yeah, use the buddy system. It's a great idea. You know, so you've got a buddy with you in case one of you go down. But if you always stay in range of a populated area, then it's not so important. But the thing I was explaining is the unit I had been flying, the time that I ended up walking 5 miles, usually went 2 hours on a tank of gas. Well, I would fly 45 minutes out, planning 45 minutes back, so I have a half-hour reserve. Well, on one particular occasion, I ran out of gas at 1 hour and 14 minutes. So depending on how your engine is tuned, what glider you're flying, and how it's set up, you know, you've got to give a margin. That was the only time I ever walked. I usually get 2 hours on a tank of gas, and I was bone dry at 1 hour and 14 minutes, and not even my half hour of reserve was enough to make up for the difference. And I ended up hiking out of an area 5 miles, carrying my motor and my glider, and had to carry it through a river. So learn from that experience instead of having your own experience to learn from.
When you say reserve, are you talking like something you measured out in the main tank, or it's a separate tank?
No, it's in the same tank. It's just a mental.
Okay.
I mean, if you got 2 hours and you figure 45 minutes out, you know, 45 minutes back, that's 1 hour and a half, giving you a good half hour left over for, you know, fudge factor.
Can you carry a spare tank?
You can run dual tanks on a flat top.
Okay.
But then again, you could run out of dual tanks. So it doesn't matter how much gas you have, you got to figure what you're going to do and try and mentally leave a buffer so that you've got some fudge factor.
Keep wind direction in mind,
Yeah, I was
too.
just gonna say
Yep.
that has obviously something to do with the wind factor. If you're
Wind
fighting
direction,
the wind,
for sure,
yeah,
yep.
if you're going with the wind 45 minutes and coming back 45 minutes against the wind,
Yeah. Don't do your initial trip with the wind, where you're going twice the speed. Because if you turn around, you know you're going to be going a lot slower.
Yeah, I've been held in place before.
Oh,
Yep.
wow.
Just sit there and, okay, I'm making no headway.
oh really?
Just go back and forth.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Cage flexing into prop. We already kind of sort of hit that one. On a lot of the units out there, actually pretty much all of them but the flat top, it takes very minimal pressure to flex the cage and the propeller together. So if you trip and fall down, the cage will flex right into the propeller and the whole thing will blow up.
That's right.
Prop strike, not a good scenario. Most people that get cheap equipment will experience 4, 5, 6 prop
My
strikes.
neighbor's gone through like 4 of them already.
Yeah, he didn't get a flat top and he's had 4 prop strikes.
No,
You know,
he's on the little mini plane.
Mini plane.
And his shroud or his housing is like all like plastic and, you know, flexible rubber bands and stuff.
it's made with tent poles
Yeah.
and nylon string. That flexes.
Seriously.
Yeah, they are.
He's if there's one oops, it's a new prop.
You got it. Okay, so the cage flexing into the prop. That's something you shouldn't have to worry about on your flat top because you pretty much have to fold the thing in half to get that happen. Netting flexing into the prop. Even if your cage doesn't flex, on a lot of the units, the netting will, where nylon netting will stretch. So on most of the units, that's one of the reasons they have so many people chop their hands up. Outdated equipment, where the netting itself will flex right into the prop. One of the big ways that people will do it is they're warming up their motor or tuning their motor, and they're holding it, and then somehow they accidentally get it locked full throttle, and the unit lurches at them, and they put their hand up to stop the unit, and their hand flexes right into the propeller.
Gee, no thanks.
Yeah, again, a catastrophic major problem with, well, everything but a flat top. So just be aware of that and be very, very careful, and warn your friends to make sure that they don't buy that crap. There's no need to get the outdated equipment. Possibly better to fly straight into something than make a sharp turn near the ground. Okay. That one, this is kind of a common one. People get themselves in a tight situation and they know they're about to fly into something, and they make a sharp turn to try and get out of that situation, in which case they make it worse, because in a turn you could be going over twice as fast as you do in straight and level flight. So if you royally screw up, you may think to yourself and may consider just going straight into the trees as opposed to spiraling into the trees trying to get out of the situation. You've got to be real careful with that, because in a paraglider, you know, if you go straight in and flare, you're only going to be going about 10 miles an hour, maybe that. But if you turn sharp right before you hit the ground, you could hit the ground doing 40, 50 miles an hour. So you got to keep that in mind, that you don't be making sharp turns or crazy aggressive maneuvers that might make your situation worse and take you from something decently safe into something that could kill you. Having enough power. Here's another one that gets people injured quite commonly. If you don't have enough power or a acceptable climb rate, it's really easy to get into a situation where you cannot climb out of it, because some of the units are so weak and they base the pilot's weight so incorrectly that, like, those power lines clear down there, they seem a long ways away. Well, if you put a 240-pound guy on a really light unit, he wouldn't be able to climb over the top of those power lines. So you start launching in a field that's, twice the size of a football field, but you get underpowered unit or a really inefficient glider, and all of a sudden you can't climb out of something very simple and basic, and you run into a big problem. That's how people crash into trees, crash into objects, fly into buildings. They don't have enough power. None of you guys have that issue. Did you get a Super or 200?
I think we got the 200.
So you got the 200, you're all on 200s. So you guys have like 196 pounds of thrust, which is more than the two of you weigh, and only slightly less than you weigh. So you have plenty of power. You'll be able to climb at near a 45-degree angle. So you're really not going to run into that issue unless you do something really stupid. Then it's your fault.
Total lift on it is like 500 pounds, right?
Yeah, it'll lift like 500 pounds. So literally, even at 225 pounds, you should be able to take a 300-pound guy tandem. So your climb rate's going to be awesome. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so like right here, if you're at ground level, flying at those power lines, I mean, if you mash the throttle, you're going to clear them by double. I mean, you're going to have plenty of time to clear them. But the best would not to be put yourself into that situation. Plan ahead, look where you're going, and pay attention, and look for power lines, because you can't really see the lines. So look for the telephone poles. You want to look for the poles, because that is something you will see long before you actually see the power lines. So look for poles, not necessarily the lines. So having enough power, yes, very important. In this case, you're all smart. You kind of let me pick out your motor for you. So I put you all on the most powerful motor that you could carry. So you got plenty of power.
Well, there's bigger motors or bigger horsepower motors, right?
Yeah, when it's 33.
You said,
no, you basically have the most powerful paramotor on the market.
With the best reliability.
What's the 33 horsepower?
Correct. It's 33 horse, but it doesn't put out any more thrust.
Oh.
It's the same engine with the bigger bores.
Yeah. Even the Evo, the Simonini Evo, side by side, it doesn't really have any more thrust.
So what's the use of having the actual horsepower then?
There's no use, which is why you didn't get it. Yeah.
What's the horsepower of the one that we have?
You guys have technically 25.5 horsepower, but you're getting 196 pounds of thrust out of that sucker. So there's lots of different engines. You basically have one of the most powerful. The Super's a little bit more powerful, but still, I mean, if you can carry a 300-pound passenger, you've got plenty of power.
Okay.
Not having enough power to maintain altitude in a turn. Now, the only thing worse than not having enough power to outclimb an object is not even having enough power to turn, because when you turn, you're reducing your amount of lift of the glider. So it takes a lot more power to turn than it does to fly straight and level. So you got to think of that. So if you're in a tight situation, you've got to keep in mind that when you turn, you've got to add power. Another thing is, you should just always add power when you turn so that you can maintain altitude and or climb.
Just like a motorcycle.
Correct. Now, a lot of this is really for people who bought crappy equipment. that doesn't have proper power, and they simply don't know any better. And a lot of injuries and deaths actually happen because people go to the incompetent morons at the USPPA. They get sold some stupid piece of crap mini plane that has like a top 80 engine, and they can't climb for crap, and they get in a tight situation and they turn, and all of a sudden they're descending, and now you hit the ground going 40 miles an hour in a turn simply because you didn't have enough power. So, not an issue for you guys. You guys got the most powerful engine on the market, basically. Temperature and altitude can affect your power. Yes, you've got 196 pounds of thrust on the perfect day at sea level, but at 5,000 foot, you've only got about 140 pounds of thrust, 145, 135 pounds of thrust. 10,000 foot, you now have maybe 95 to 100 pounds of thrust. So
right here, that's only 5,000 AGL, right?
Right. Yeah, the higher you climb on these two-stroke motors, the less power you have.
How about your jetting on that at altitude? How does that work?
Well, we don't really do the jetting because we have a carburetor that we can tune. So you can just tweak the high end and tune it for whichever altitude you're at, which, you know, it really doesn't take that much. I mean, it'll probably climb to 18,000 foot. What?
You tune yours while you're in the air, you reach back and...
Not unless I'm going to climb to, you know, 20,000 foot. So no, I pretty much never tune it in the air.
So you're not fouling plugs or anything like that being the two-stroke?
No, not fouling plugs. I mean, the plugs will go 60 to 100 hours on the particular unit, on the Simonini, which is really nice. It goes a long time, and you don't really you don't foul them. I don't.
You just change them out.
Yeah, they just kind of wear out after a while. Temperature and altitude can affect your power. So if you go from Alaska at 0 degrees at sea level, and then all of a sudden you go to you know, the desert at 8,000 feet and it's 95 degrees out, you're going to have a lot less power than what you're used to. So keep in mind the temperature difference, because if you line up, you get used to how long it takes you to get off the ground. For example, we're going to be starting your very first flights. Hopefully we'll get you, you know, 300-400 flights. You'll start to get really accustomed to how it responds at sea level. Well, when you go back home, if you live at 6,000 feet, you're not going to have nearly as much power as we do practicing at the beach at sea level in California. So keep that in mind. Always have a safe place to land. Say again?
Let me ask a question. So,
Sure.
Is that something you'll feel like when you're in the air and you say, like I'm used to flying in Virginia at 600 feet, and then you know, I come up here, is that something I'll feel automatically
Yes.
when I'm airborne? Or is it something I just have to be consciously aware of?
Yes
You'll
and no.
feel it.
Where you're going to feel it is on your motor run up. Before you take off, right before you start running to launch, you're going to lean all the way forward, pointing the motor almost straight up, and you're going to go full throttle numerous times, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, full throttle. You got to do your power run up. And when you do your power run up, you will feel how much thrust is pushing down on your legs. So that is where you're going to know how much thrust you have.
Okay.
And that's where you should notice it first and be able to gear what's going on. Plus, you'll also recognize problems. That's part of your pre-flight. Because if there's something wrong with your motor and you go full throttle and you don't feel any thrust, you know, it's not pushing you like normal, then something's wrong with your engine, so you need to check it.
Okay.
So right before we launch, we do our motor run up, wah, 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 full throttle. Now another reason we do that is a two-stroke, after idling for a while, it'll start to load up. So if you let your two-stroke idle for several minutes and then mash the throttle all at once, it'll probably bog and will not rev up. So it's going to take a bit. You've got to rev it up slowly, rum, rum, so you can get it running perfectly right before you launch. That motor run-up is very, very important for numerous reasons. You're checking the thrust, you're checking vibrations, you're checking the noise to see if the pitch is different or anything sounds funny, because if the pitch is different, your prop could be broken or a bolt could be missing and something's rattling. So you're listening to all these things. Plus it's telling you how much power you have, so you can kind of gauge how long it's going to take to get off the ground. And you're getting your motor running perfectly smooth right before you run, so that when you mash the throttle to take off the ground, you get power instead of blah 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 blah. Yeah. Okay. Always have a safe place to land in mind. We sort of talked about that, but if you're flying over the forest, you need to be high enough to where you can fly to a field or an open area or a clearing, and you have to be aware that the grass on the ground may be 10 foot high, but from the air it looks like grass. So it can be very easily deceiving, so you got to really pay close attention to a good, safe place to land at all times. Do not stick yourself in a position where if your motor dies, you die. That means don't be a half a mile offshore out in the ocean 3 feet off the ground.
Oh man, that just gave me the chills thinking about it.
Or as one of the guys I know, he was actually doing a foot drag in the ocean, dragging his foot on the water a half a mile offshore.
Do they have flotation?
No,
Wow,
he was mental.
it's crazy.
Possibly he trained with the USPPGA. Freaking retard.
Not
Yeah.
in the Bible.
Something like that.
Oh man.
So always have a safe place to land. That is extremely important. You do not want to end up in a situation where if your motor all of a sudden dies, you end up in the trees, or you end up smacking into some rocks, or you're in a canyon that you can't get out of and end up smashing into a cliff. Always have a place to land.
How was it landed in a tree? Say if you're over the forest and you know you're going to have to land in the trees, so you flare it right above the treetops and settle it in. Is that something you've ever heard of? Or
Yes, landing in trees is basically second to landing in the water.
Really? Is that bad?
Well, as far as safety, it's pretty darn safe. The vast majority of people who land in trees survive.
Okay.
That
So-
guy has a flat.
Yeah, just,
Oh yeah.
oh, yeah, you should probably pull up and let's tell him. Oh my gosh, he lost it. Yeah,
I think by now
He knows.
I think he knows. No, he might just be passing you.
No,
Change lanes left?
he knows.
I'm flashing them.
Yeah, he knows. Can you change lanes
Can't.
left?
They got caught on me.
Oh god.
Can't now.
Nice.
we should tell him, hey, how's your jack work?
Need a spare? Well, we need one
Yeah,
too.
we need one too.
Quick, take his jack and leave him on.
There you go. Maybe we're burning rubber out the back too. Do you see any?
No.
Okay. After launch checks. After you leave the ground, check your reserve. Make sure it's not dangling and about to open. Check your carabiners. Make sure your carabiners are adjusted and they didn't end up getting twisted sideways. Check your risers to make sure all of your D-links on your risers are the same height. Make sense? Where the lines hook into the D-links, if they're all the same height, you're at trim speed. So you want to check, and if there's a problem with the glider, you might have the A's higher than the D's, and or vice versa. And so you check that, make sure that all of your lines where they hook to the risers are at the exact same height. Sometimes you can also get a D-link twisted, so you want to check and make sure all of your D-links are straight. Another thing you can do is also roll your finger on the little lock to the D-link to make sure all your D-links are tight, because it has happened many times where the D-link was wide open and your lines could actually unhook from the D-link. Yeah, other things that can happen is your risers can get bound up. On an uncertified glider, I launched once and it had pulled about 3 inches of the B-line, and I was almost in a B-line stall immediately when I left the ground. Hence, you check the height of your risers and make sure that everything is good to go. Other things you check and make sure your lines, you want to look up at your glider, make sure you don't have sticks in your lines, snagging a whole bunch of your lines together. Make sure you've got the gliders open. Now and then people will launch and the lines will get tangled and cause a cravat where the glider is actually stuck into the lines and there's actually a collapse on one side or even both sides that is locked in and won't come out, and that could put you in a slight turn. We can get to what to do with the cravat later. But very important, once you leave the ground, check your glider, look around, make sure everything is good before you just continue on your way.
Quick question about the lines.
Yes.
On my K2, the way it came to me, when I open up each, like the A, B, C lines, they're all different colors. But on one of them, there's like the green is stuck in with the blue at one point. Is there a reason for that, or they just didn't have the same color, but it needed to go to the proper place anyway? Do you know what I'm referring to?
Different colored line. It's probably on your B riser, and it's probably your outside B riser, which is your stabilo line. So you've got your risers, you've got A, B, C, and D on most gliders. Your B line on the outside is your stabilo line. Very commonly they will be a different color so you can quickly recognize it. If you have a cravat, you can grab that B line and give it a flick and it's attached to the very tip of your wing. So you would fish out a cravat with your stabilo line. That's why it's a different color. And that's something we should also go over at another time. Will be what to do with the cravat. Check your glider when you get off the ground. After launch checks, check your carabiners are closed and hanging properly. Here's one I missed. Check your trims. So you want to make sure if you just launched, it's very easy to accidentally hit the buttons to release your trim tabs, which partially accelerates your glider. And or maybe you bumped it on one side and now half of your glider is accelerated while the other half of your glider is deaccelerated. So you want to check your trims and make sure they're locked down or at the same setting of where you want them to be. So we're going to want to fly with trims down unless we get to a higher altitude and want to go faster. So we're going to learn about trims at a different point. Let's see, check the trims on your glider. Check your speed system. Here's another one. I've actually launched and accidentally had my speed line, which is there's two sets of pulleys on your riser with a line that goes between them. And if you get that line accidentally bound up, that can be accelerating your glider and can create a turn. It can also get bound up and tangle up the glider and really jack you up. So you want to check and make sure your speed system is not locked up. If you have a speed bar, your speed bar can be an issue. So you want to make sure that your speed bar is properly attached to the seat, and or after launch you put it in your foot where it needs to be and make sure that the lines are not tangled, they're not locked under the comfort bars, they're not snagged on a camera, they're not snagged on your shoulder or on your clothing. So you want to make sure everything is free and correct as soon as you leave the ground. Check everything out. Of course, once you climb to a safe altitude. The 4 T's: time, temperature, terrain, tenacity. Now we're starting to get into weather. The time, temperature, terrain, tenacity, the 4 T's. When you go to launch, one of the first things you look at is what time is it? What time of day am I launching? Earlier in the morning, later in the evenings, it's generally going to be smoother. From like 11 to about 3 o'clock in the afternoon is going to be the most heating during the day, so you're going to have the most thermic conditions. So the time of day is very, very important to do with whether it's a good time to be flying for what you want to do that day. Temperature. Of course, the temperature also has a huge effect on the weather and what you're going to experience when you get in the air. If you happen to be in Alaska and it's 0 degrees, you're probably not going to have a lot of thermic activity because you're not going to have a lot of ground heating. So when the temperature is lower, you're going to have less thermal activity, so the air should be considerably smoother. But if you happen to be in Arizona and it's 120 degrees outside, you probably want to keep your butt on the ground because the thermals can be so vicious, it will knock your butt out of the sky. So check the time of day, check the temperature, know what temperature it is, and factor that into how rough the air is going to be. The terrain has a lot to do with it. If you live in the mountains, you've got to be careful with wind and rotor and different types of thermic activity based on the terrain that you're in. If you've got a lot of rocks and areas that can create a lot of heating, it's going to create more thermic activity and worse turbulence. If you're taking off from a sod farm that's 800 square miles of nothing but grass, and bright green grass generally keeps thermic activity to a minimum because it doesn't get heated as much. It's actually cooler, which is another thing. If you want to find a place to land, find a big open space of grass because you're going to get a lot less thermic activity than if you decide to land at Walmart on the blacktop in 100-degree temperatures.
So what do you feel? So you're coming in on blacktop and you hit the thermal. What's the experience like, or what do you feel? Do you lurch up, or?
Well, there's two things, because on one side of the thermal, the air is rising, and on another side, the air might be sinking. So what can happen is you're coming into land, and all of a sudden you hit air that's rising and air that's sinking, and you go in between it, which one side of your glider wants to go up, one side wants to go down.
Okay.
And so it can be very disconcerting and can cause collapses.
What happens if you hit a thermal at altitude? Say like you're 1,000 feet and you hit the edge of one. Does it self-correct once you get out of it, or because you said it knock your butt out of the air was the phrase you used?
Well, if it's 120 degrees out, the thermals can be rising. The heating is so hot that the thermals can be what we call bullet thermals.
Okay.
So instead of a nice fluffy, all of a sudden you start to climb, you get ripped out of your shoes, and your shoes are left in the middle of the air, and you shoot up like 3,000 foot per minute. And then all of a sudden you go into the sink, and you're full throttle going down at 1,500 foot per minute. So the really high temperatures create a much higher variance in the rate of the thermals, how fast the air is rising.
But if you're high enough, is that something the equipment will handle, or is it just that? You know what I'm saying? Like if you have
to a point.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's 80 degrees outside, it'll probably be good strong thermals, but you should be good. If it's 120 degrees outside, it might be so vicious you probably might not want to fly that day.
See, what I'll run into is like on the Blue Ridge,
Right.
I'll get lift thermals off of that, and so
Yep.
I don't see it. It's not going to be 120 degrees.
Yeah, well,
I didn't know what what you have to watch for there.
so time, temperature, terrain, tenacity.
Okay.
What time of day are you flying in the Blue Ridge Mountains? Maybe it's, maybe you're flying at 6 a.m., in which case you probably won't get much thermic activity at all, if
Right.
any. What temperature? Maybe it's 55 degrees outside. Probably be pretty darn smooth. Or maybe it's 95 and you're going to get a bit stronger thermals. But then you got terrain. You got green everywhere, which is a lot cooler. So you're going to get a lot smoother, more gentle thermals if you've got all kinds of green, lush, wet grass. And
what you see right here.
yeah, where out here we've got solid rock without a blade of grass, and you get 85-degree temperatures, and it's going to be a lot more violent.
Okay.
So that's why we got terrain in there, because it depends on the terrain as to how vicious those thermals are going to be. Then last one is tenacity, which depends on the air and what's going on. I mean, if you see black clouds and mamata and streaking clouds and you've got high winds, it depends on the tenacity of the conditions and how violent the air looks. Or if you just see these nice big poofy cumulus clouds, it looks a lot friendlier than big black clouds, or it's so dark outside, or you've got dust in the air where there's obviously so high a winds it's blowing dust up into the air. So time, temperature, terrain, tenacity are the main 4 things that you would look at before you go flying. Sound good?
Yes.
Okay. Pendulum, forwards and backwards. Practice.
Is that like hanging from your motor in your garage or something?
No, not hanging from your motor in the garage. It could be, but pendulum. We're actually flying the world's coolest swing set. Because your glider is above you, you are hanging from a string underneath the glider. So if you hit the throttle, the motor will push you, the glider will go behind you, and you'll start to climb. If you let off the throttle, well, all of a sudden you'll sink back down and your glider will want to surge forward, called pendulum, or you could call it oscillation, forwards and rear. So on one hand, that can be your friend. On one hand, it can be your enemy. One common thing that newbies do is they take off full throttle, get scared 10 feet off the ground, let off the throttle. So they climb, they swing way up, their glider goes behind them, they let the throttle completely off because it scares them, then they swing backwards, the glider swings forward, and they swing into the ground. Very common. So a pendulum is something you've got to be aware of and make sure you're flying smoothly and you're not doing all kinds of swinging forwards and backwards. Now you can practice it in the air and you can induce it. So maybe climb up to 1,000 feet and try it. Go full throttle, let off the throttle, and just kind of get a feel for swinging and how to use that, and practice it so that you can be good at it so you can implement it in a place where you need to implement it. And be aware of it for your launch and landing so you're not, penduluming and don't end up smacking yourself into the ground. Okay, spiral wingtip to horizon practice. Good thing to practice once you get up flying. We'll be flying around in circles and getting the hang of turning fairly quickly so that you can get some experience with really handling your glider. But we don't want to turn too quickly. What we want to do is you would practice a spiral. So if you start turning right, you would pull brake, pull brake, pull brake until you bring your wingtip down to where you can just see the horizon underneath your wingtip. And then don't go any farther than that to start. After a while, after you practice it a whole bunch, you can start working down past that. But when you first start, you can do turn to the left, pull it down until your wingtip is all the way down to the horizon, and then just hold it for maybe a rotation, and then ease back out. And you need to start getting a hang of the getting into it is easy. The exiting it, you need to start to get a balance for the exit, because you're like a rock on a string, and if you start swinging it around this way and then all of a sudden move the string, well, the rock still wants to keep moving. So the exit is kind of interesting, and you have to kind of get a feel for it, because what you do is you first ease off the brakes and then pull back into it to balance it out. Kind of interesting. I can't really teach you that one. You just kind of have to play with it slowly and start to learn the balance, if that makes sense. Any questions on that? Booyah! So if you want to make a tight turn, don't turn any sharper than wingtip to horizon. Because if you keep pulling brake, you can, bring the wingtip below horizon, keep pulling brake to where you're actually pointed straight down. So we don't want you to be pointed straight down. Try and keep your turns no more than wingtip to horizon if you're going to turn really sharp. That's about as sharp as you can go when you're first starting out. And then, you
So you're
do
saying
that 1,000 times before you start going past
when you start to come out of the turn, you let off on the brake.
Yeah, to exit the spiral, you're going to ease off in the brake, and you'll start to exit. And then what happens is the glider will start going straight while your body is still swinging sideways. So you have to ease off, but then pull back on the brake to redirect the glider the direction your body is going. So
That's on the same side? So it's not,
yeah, same side. Yeah, one side. So you want to make a right turn, you're going to pull right brake. Then you want to exit the right turn, you're going to ease off the right brake, and then pull right brake, and then ease off right brake. So first you initiate a turn by turning the glider, which then redirects the direction of your body. But
a little checkup.
yeah, but now once you redirect the direction of your body, you need to then make sure the glider is going the direction of your body. So when you're going around and your body is swinging around in a circle, you ease the glider off, point the glider straight, but your body still wants to go to the side. So you then have to point the glider the direction your body is going. But
So bring the glider back over the center of you.
Correct. Yep. Which you're going to get a feel of. Nobody can really teach you that one, but I can give you parameters and tell you, don't be turning farther than wingtip to horizon to start. You can just kind of stick with that one. But once you get the hang of that, then we can start working on more. And when you get to that point, if you have questions, call and I can walk you through it.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything.
As you get there, you'll start asking me the right questions.
I do that, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's more of an unconscious, like I had to, like it just felt right. And then
Yeah, you'll start to learn the balance of the spiral. So there's a feel to it. So it's something you want to practice because you want to get the hang of getting into and out of the turn more quickly, so you can start getting that balance down. Because it's not getting into the turn that's the problem, it's the getting out of the turn. Because you can give yourself a collapse if you exit the turn incorrectly. Because you get your body going one direction, then you need to make sure the glider is going the same direction, because if you go sideways to your glider, you give yourself a deflation. But it's a balance we'll work on. So exiting the spiral, that was what we just kind of talked about. Okay, flying through your wake or other people's wake. Bad plan. Now, we just talked about doing a spiral. If you're going to fly around in circle, preferably climb while flying around in circle. Because if you maintain the same altitude, when you get back to the 360, you're going to be going through your own wake. And if you go through your own wake, it can give you a deflation because it's going to be some wicked turbulence because you just flew around in a circle. So you've got to be aware of that. Very commonly, if you make a sharp turn, you may want to consider exiting the turn at about 270 degrees so that you climb over where you were previously as you came into it.
So
Kind of like a lock washer. Correct. Yep. Yeah, if you think of like a lock washer, where it's kind of separated, but you flip it upside down so the other side is up.
So you're corkscrewing that in.
Correct, but you corkscrew up so that your wake is always below
you.
Correct. Yep. You always want to have a spatial awareness of where you've been. It is extremely important because if you fly through your own wake, it will be a big old ka-wham where the glider you guys are flying will take care of it, as well as the training, the active piloting, because you brake for turbulence. So if you get slammed, all of a sudden you're going to hit the brakes to basically repressurize the glider. But we'll be going through some more of that.
No, but if you can touch on it real quick, because it's been brought up to me through them, through the locals up there.
Okay.
With that turbulence of flying with other people, with if you have 2 or 3 paragliders flying together,
Right?
then that turbulence is like a jet wash in the sense of it can give you some real.
Correct. If you fly behind the guy in front of you at the same altitude, you are in his jet wash, should we call it, which can be very, very violent and really throw you around.
So just be above him.
Correct. So if you want to follow your buddy, be slightly above him.
Or offside.
Yeah, or off to the side, or off to the side and above him.
Okay.
As long as you're above him, the wake turbulence sinks. So the wake and the like the prop wash coming off of your propeller sinks. So if you're above him, you won't hit any of his turbulence. Even if you're only like a foot or two above him, you probably won't have any turbulence.
Okay, so now I want to flip it into one other situation. Your, I believe is G space or whatever. There's a lot of planes flying, small planes.
Right?
So you can fly, even if you don't see the plane, I guess that there's such a minimal balance of the jet wash when it comes to your wing that it gives you a flutter or whatever else. What's your good spacing or off of a plane that you see coming in or leaving you?
A big plane,
or just a small plane if you're going to cross him.
that wake turbulence can stay around for up to like 6 minutes. A long time. So if a 747 lands in front of you and you fly by 3 minutes later, you could get completely knocked freaking out.
How about
of
a
the
little
sky.
Cessna I'm talking?
A little Cessna, very similar. It's 1,500 pounds moving through the air at 100 miles an hour. You know, you've got to really be careful. Like if a Cessna were stupid and flew directly over the top of you, that wake turbulence could sink down into you and really give you some wicked turbulence.
That's where I'm trying to get at. So
correct.
If you're flying at 1,000 AGL and you got a plane coming that flew over the top of you at 2,000 AGL, so 1,000 feet above you, are you going to be affected within that 1,000 feet?
At 1,000, 1,500 feet, I wouldn't be too worried about it.
Okay.
But I would still fly to the side. Like if you're going the same direction,
Get off to him.
yeah, go off to the side so that his wake turbulence doesn't sink into you.
So it is, from what I've heard, small planes are just as violent as big planes, just not the severity of the violence.
Correct. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It'll put off some serious wake turbulence. It'd be like, you know, if you're standing on the side of the road and a semi goes by you, I mean, it almost knocks you over with the wake that it creates.
Correct.
Imagine if you're sitting there flying a paraglider and a semi goes by you. It won't be pretty. It would be ugly. Kind of like when they claimed I was flying next to the freeway. You know, if you were a pilot, you would know darn well I'm not stupid enough to fly next to the freeway, because if a truck goes by you at 70 miles an hour and you're right next to him, you are going to get knocked on your butt. It would be a very bad scenario. So yes, wake turbulence, know where it's been, know where it's going, and pay attention to that spatial relations.
Small or big.
Yeah, small, big, anything.
Well,
get out of the way, stay above. Another really bad thing is helicopters, because they put off a huge rotor off of their blades. Man, you can really get, one of my friends, a Red Bull pilot, was doing some shooting, the helicopter got too close to him and just wadded up his glider. So you see a helicopter get away, quick, get away, get above. Flying through wake, flying behind people. One of the worst places to be behind them would be to have your glider at their prop level, because directly behind the prop is going to be the worst wake turbulence. Your prop is putting off, you know, some crazy stuff, and it can really mess up your glider.
Before you start it?
Okay, wind shear. Wind shear is basically when you have two different bodies of air moving, say, two different directions or speeds. You get some serious turbulence when moving between them. So part of your weather, when you're checking the weather, would be to check the air movement and the wind speed at different altitudes. So if you get a big variance in wind speeds at different altitude, you may decide it's not a good day to fly. For example, it could be blowing 5 miles an hour on the ground where you think, oh wow, that's great. But at 1,000 foot, it could be blowing 40, in which case it's going to be extremely turbulent and be a real rough ride. So generally when you check the weather, you're going to check the airspeed and the wind speed at different velocities, such as 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, 15,000, 30,000. You check it at different altitudes so you know exactly what's going on. And you're looking for those big discrepancies and different air speeds that could create a lot of turbulence. Wind shear you can't really see. There's not much of a warning. You could be flying along and climbing and run into just wicked turbulence and your whole glider just disappears. Been there, done that. Flying along in the mountains at like 11,000 foot in the winter in cold air where it's absolutely smooth as can be, just not a ripple in the sky, and all of a sudden, boom, 95% collapse. So you got to be aware of that and understand what it is and where it can be, and check the wind at different altitudes before you fly.
Check it. Are you calling up ATIS, or are you calling up an airport weather report?
Well, you could check it on the internet. You could check it with WX Brief, and yes, you could check it with all sorts of different weather services.
But you are recommending to be familiar with those types of reports before you do fly.
Correct. Yeah, you should definitely check the winds at different altitudes every single time you fly. Basically, every time you fly, you should call WX Brief and get a complete weather briefing to find out if you've got a front moving your way, or high winds predicted, or what's going on, or thunderstorms predicted, and then you get the wind speeds at different altitudes.
Just do it primarily the same as a pre-flight then.
Correct.
On a plane.
Yeah, that's part of checking the weather.
Yeah, you can do an 800 number. There's multiple different things, but every
800
airport,
WX Brief is the official FAA weather, and it's free.
BRI.
WX Brief, BRIEF. Did I spell brief right?
I don't know. That's what I can't spell.
WX Brief. However you spell brief.
I before E, except after what?
See,
There you go.
but not always. This is the
There's an
English
extra
language.
number in there.
Yeah. Okay. So wind shear, that can be that. Plus you also have turbulence based on the different bodies of air moving different directions. Thermal. A thermal, basically what happens is the sun heats the ground heats the air, and then the air will rise up, which is a thermal. That rising air, when it reaches the dew point, will then turn into visible moisture, which is a cloud. So when you see those big puffy cumulus clouds, those are being fed by a thermal. They're actually created by a thermal. That air is rising under the cloud, rising up and creating visible moisture. So if you see a whole bunch of poofy cumulus clouds, the odds are pretty good you're going to have turbulence underneath them, and or lift where you can get inside of that rising air. Now, to use a thermal, if you're flying along and all of a sudden you feel yourself rising dramatically and you can feel the lift and you start climbing in altitude, you could count to 3, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. If you're still going up, you can turn and you should be able to make a complete 360 inside of that thermal. If you only make 1 1,000 and you're no longer going up, the thermal probably isn't big enough to ride. So you can actually use those thermals to your benefit. Now, on the outside of those thermals is very commonly sinking air. or just stationary air, because if you've got one body of air rising, right next to it you probably have a body of air that's sinking. And when you go through that, it's going to be fairly turbulent. But you can start to feel and understand where that is and be able to deal with that. But thermals are your buddy. A lot of people think that, thermals, they just classify it as turbulence, and so they never fly when it's bumpy. But you can use those thermals to your advantage, and it's a lot of fun. Feel yourself going up, count to 3. If you're still going up, try turning. If you're still going up, see if you can shut your motor off and see if you can climb that thermal all the way up to the base of the cloud. Now, the way the cross-country pilots do it is they will catch that thermal, ride it all the way up as high as they can go, and then take off and go on glide, and glide as far as they can. Then when they catch another one, they ride that all the way up as high as they can go, and then go back on glide, and they try and see how far they can go without having an engine. That would be a cross-country competition, which is a lot of fun, and you can conserve gas if you got a motor. You shut your motor off and you can go maybe hundreds of miles with your engine off. So thermals are your buddy. Just be aware of what they are, and that those are your friend, and how to use them.
Now, is that how you did your 280-mile trip, or
Correct.
your cross-country?
Yeah, when I did 280 miles, I had my engine off probably half the time. So, I flew way over 100 miles with my engine off. At one point, I hit 17,000 feet with my engine off because I caught a thermal and I rode it all the way up. I just going around in circles, around and around and around, rode it all the way up to 17,000 feet with the engine off. Then you go on glide, and from 17,000 feet, you could glide almost 30 miles before you come down.
What's the glide ratio on a K2?
Almost 10 to 1 on the glider that you guys have.
Wow.
Extremely efficient glider. Very, very nice glider. The sinking air. So right on the other side of the thermal, you've got air that's rising. You can also have air that's sinking. If you get into sink, fly sideways, speed up, try and accelerate out of the sink, or just keep flying, and you should get out of it.
What's that mean?
It's kind of like undertow in the ocean. If you get drug out to sea, well, you swim parallel to the beach.
Okay.
Because you want to get out of what's towing you out to sea. Same thing with sink. If you get into sinking air, either turn around and go the other way, and or fly through it and get out of it quickly so that you can get back into rising air or stationary air. Now, the nice thing about sink, and something to know, is generally sink does not go all the way to the ground. Because when the sinking air gets to the ground, it spreads out to the side because it doesn't go through objects. So if you're falling out of the sky and you're full throttle, be happy in knowing the odds are pretty good that when you get near the ground, it will all of a sudden stop and start to go parallel to the ground instead of take you all the way into the ground.
Can you rewind that 1 second? You said if you're still sinking with full power.
Correct. If you get in
wind's
sync,
pushing. Okay.
yeah, if you get in sync,
but your wing is still fully.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, wing could be fully inflated, fully open,
Okay.
but you can be sinking so fast that your motor cannot outclimb it. That would be like we were talking about if you're flying in the middle of the day in Arizona in 120-degree weather. You can have such violent changes in the speed of those thermals and the sink that you literally, I've been in sinking air in Arizona where I was full throttle on a flat top and going down at about 1,500 foot per minute.
Oh,
So I was dropping like a rock while full throttle. But once you get to the ground, the odds are you're going to go sideways, so it's not like you're going to pound into the ground. The other thing, that also goes with wind. The wind, a question I get a lot is, could the wind blow you into a mountain? Probably not, because when the wind gets to the mountain
Right.
or an object, it's going to go up and over the object. Because wind doesn't blow through things, it's deflected. And so you're going to go with the wind. You may be blown towards the mountain, but once you get to it, the odds are you're going to go up and over the top of it.
1,500 feet climb.
Yeah, and it'll go up very, very, very rapidly. The danger there is if you get sucked over the top and end up in the rotor in the backside, which we will also get to. So, but sinking air, just, you know, try and fly out of it, keep going, speed up, get out of the sinking air, find some sink, or turn around and go right back to where the thermal was, where the rising air.
Yeah, but if you're sinking 1,500 feet a minute, and then within that sink, you still got to make that turn, so you're going to...
You would be
lose
sinking
more,
slightly more.
Yeah, lose more altitude in the turn.
But you can turn around pretty quick. So if you go from a thermal, like you're going up at 2,000 foot per minute, and then all of a sudden, wham, you're going down 1,500 foot per minute, you could flip a 180 and quickly get back into the rising air and start going up again.
Okay.
Or you can feel your wingtip falling off the edge of the thermal. So you get the hang of feeling that. So remember, we count to 3 when we hit that thermal and we start flying around in circles. Well, if you feel your wingtip start dropping off the edge of the thermal, then make the turn sharper. And if you don't feel it dropping off, then you can shallow the turn. So you start making your circle and trying to pinpoint your circle so that your circle aligns with the thermal, which is generally round. Thermal is generally a round column of air. So you want to learn and train yourself to find where the edge of that thermal is so that you can stay inside of the rising air as long as possible.
Is there anything that what do you specifically, besides the feel, is there something visual besides the basic cloud structure?
No, you won't see anything.
So you're just going to be flying along or whatever, and all of a sudden you're just going to catch a thermal or an uplift, and you're going to go woohoo!
Correct. Yeah, you could have a perfectly blue skies and sunshine without a cloud in the sky and hit a thermal and or sink. So,
or you may not find one at all.
Yeah. And or there might be a big fluffy cumulus cloud above you, in which case you kind of understand that you're in the thermal that's feeding that cloud. And generally the thermal will be upwind of the cloud because the thermal drifts with the wind. So if you're looking for the thermal and the wind is blowing, you kind of guess how fast the wind is blowing and how far in front of the cloud you need to be in order to find the thermal that's feeding the cloud. So you kind of visualize all of that stuff. Okay. Let's get into your nightmare that can kill you, horribly bad, catastrophic, big topic. Rotor. Rotor is horribly, horribly bad. Similar to a rock in a stream that creates white water and, basically rapidly churning water on the back side of the rock. Well, on the front side of the rock, it's probably smooth as can be, but on the back side of the rock, you've got the churning water. That's rotor. Same thing with wind. As wind goes over the top of a sharp hill, it can churn like a washing machine over the backside of the hill. So you always want to know which direction the wind is traveling. Extremely important to know which way the wind is going so that you can and stay upwind of the hill. Let's put that down. Always know the wind direction. That is extremely important. Now, there's different types of rotor. You can have mechanical turbulence, like off of a tree or a building, and you can have the rotor off of the backside of a hill or objects. So pretty much everything that's in the air is going to disturb the air. And this is where you have to think about it logically and intelligently and determine what the air is going to do as it relates to an object. Now, if you've got a telephone pole, the rotor is probably pretty small. It could still create a little bit of turbulence, but it's not going to affect you as much as the rotor behind a building. Another thing is the size and strength of the rotor. If you have no wind, you have no rotor because the wind's not moving. If you have 4 mile an hour wind, the rotor won't be anywhere near as bad as if you have 15 mile an hour wind. So the stronger the wind, the stronger the rotor. Now think of that washing machine as the air rolls over the top of the mountain, then the air goes down and around and churns. If you fly into that air, it's gonna basically, the glider could pass you and flip upside down and it'll be spinning around. Horribly bad nightmare of death. Do not fly into a rotor. At all points when you're flying, you always want to know where the wind is blowing and how strong it is, which is easier than you might think. Because if you've got 15 mile an hour winds, you know, and you're on a glider that only flies, say, 24 miles an hour, you're going to know which way the wind blowing and how strong it is based on your ground speed. So you just point, you know, if you fly into the wind, you're only going to be going 10 miles an hour, where with the wind, you're going to be going, say, 35 miles an hour. So it's pretty easy. The stronger the wind is, the easier it is to know how strong it is and which direction it's going based on your ground speed. The thing that's difficult is if you only have like a couple mile an hour wind, it's more difficult because you can't really decipher your ground speed as much if you're only determining a couple mile an hour. Now, one way to determine the wind speed would be to fly around in a smooth circle. You make a nice steady circle and you watch your ground speed. The direction you're going the fastest is the direction the wind is blowing. The direction you're going the slowest is the direction the wind is coming from. And that's how you can easily determine which direction the wind's blowing. Which is very useful if you're going to land, because you always want to land into the wind. So if it's fairly light wind and you can't really tell which direction the wind's going, maybe fly around in a circle and try and determine which way you're flying the slowest, and whichever way you're flying the slowest is the direction you want to land. So rotor, very important to pay attention where the air's going so you don't get caught in a rotor that kicks your butt and hands it to you. Mechanical turbulence and how far behind objects you should be. How far does rotor travel? Well, it depends on the speed of the wind and the terrain. So if you have a 10-foot tall building and the wind's blowing 4 miles an hour, the rotor behind the building is not going to be as strong and not going to travel as far as if the wind is blowing 15 miles an hour. If you have like a 15 mile an hour wind blowing over a 10-foot building, you could have that rotor travel maybe 100 foot or more and create turbulence well beyond the building. So you got to think about how strong the wind is and how far behind an object you are, and be very careful you balance that optimally. Any questions on that one? Okay, good. Okay, if you got a mountain, the wind and a wave can travel fairly high. So if you've got a 15 mile an hour wind going over the top of the mountain, you don't want to be flying over the mountain 10 foot off the deck.
150 feet.
You probably want to be 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet, maybe about a third to a half the height of the mountain above the mountain to be clear. You want to give yourself a lot of space if you're going to fly over an object that has a lot of wind going over the top of it. Maybe a third again the height, half again the height, a quarter again the height, but a considerable distance above the height of the object when you're going over something that could possibly have a rotor. Or just flat out don't do it, go around the object and give yourself a lot of distance. Because not only can the rotor be above the object, but it can be beside the object as well. So the rotor could be beside a building, not just in front of it. Not just behind it. Let the glider fly, don't stall it. Okay, so let's say you just flew into a rotor, which is a washing machine. If you're flying, say, with the wind, and the direction of the air is going in a circle, at first, the air is going to want to shoot your glider out in front of you and push you down. If the glider goes in front of you, you want to hit the brakes, keep the glider above you. But if you're on the other side, the glider could shoot behind you and your body could swing way out in front of the glider. If the glider's in behind you, you go hands up. Glider's in front of you, hit the brakes. Glider's behind you, hands up. You pretty much can't stall a glider that is in front of you. So if the glider shoots out in front of you, hit the brakes as hard as you have to keep the glider back above you. You can slam the brakes and bury the brakes. Don't be a wuss and don't be bashful. If that glider is overflying you, get on those brakes and bury the brakes as hard as you possibly can if you got to stick them all the way under your butt. But as soon as the glider's back above you, you need to be all the way off the brakes again. So the key to surviving something like a rotor or bad turbulence is keeping the glider above you and letting it fly. You don't want to be slamming the brakes when the glider's above you. You need to be able to keep the glider flying. Because in a rotor or bad turbulence, the glider can get in a situation where it hardly even wants to fly, and it might be almost parachutal where it's falling straight out of the sky, and any amount of brake could then stall the glider and make your situation work. So if the glider's above you and open, don't be slamming the brakes. If the glider's in front of you, brake. If the glider's behind you, hands off and let the glider fly. If it's above you, be very gentle and just enough pressure to feel what's going on. Just fly the glider, keep the glider above you and open. Don't stall it, don't let it overfly you. Keep the glider open. Be real gentle. I have actually flown into rotor and fallen out of the sky like 70 feet straight down, but very gently kept the glider open the whole time, and as soon as I got out of the rotor, it just flew away. But some people, they get in that situation, they over control it and stall the glider, or they under control it and let the glider overfly them and frontal and collapse. So don't let it frontal and collapse, but don't over control it and stall it. Brake for turbulence. If you're flying along and you hit turbulence, your first instinct should be to possibly add some brake for turbulence. But don't fly around with your brakes on. Again, remember, we're going to be gentle on the controls. You can use the brake to instantly pressurize your glider, but you don't want to hold a lot of brake on. That's a bad plan. Generally, when a glider is going to collapse, it will need to overfly you, so it's going to have to pass you. If a glider's overflying you, you hit the brakes. but it's not going to stay in that attitude. It's then going to come back above your head. So if you feel it surge out in front of you and start to overfly you, bam, you hit the brakes. But once it comes back above your head, ease off on the brakes and just keep the weight of your arms on the brakes so you can feel what's going on.
Can you over brake? I guess you can, but what happens if you're over braking and your wing gets too far behind you?
That is not going to happen.
Okay.
You're not going to do that. You can't really over brake if the glider's out in front of you. Say the glider is directly 90 degrees in front of you and you're looking at your glider straight ahead of you.
You know something's wrong.
Your brakes better be under your butt as hard as you possibly can. But as the glider swings back above your head, your hands need to go up. So it should be a constant movement. It's not like you vary the brakes and hold them there until it stalls. You slam the brakes, and immediately as the glider starts coming back over your head, hands up.
Oh no, I was saying, could, if somebody was heavy-handed, could somebody apply too much brake where it stalls something out?
Not if the glider's in front of you.
But behind you?
If it's behind you and you hit too much brake, yes, you could stall the glider and fall out of the sky backwards till it reopens. But then you're dealing with a stall, and we need to talk about that. In smooth air, a certified glider, such as your glider, is going to be extremely difficult to stall. So it's not something you're going to do inadvertently. You don't have to be like all scared of it. In order to stall that K2, you basically have to take a wrap on the controls, or more like a wrap and a half, and then bury your hands under your butt, which is going to be extremely physically difficult. It'll be like doing a dip. I mean, so there's going to be a lot of pressure. Then you're going to have to hold it there for about 10 seconds for the glider to actually go into a stall. So it's not something you're going to accidentally do unless you are a moron. So don't be a moron. Well, the people that stall their gliders are, for one, people that are on the wrong glider for their ability, or they trained with the USPPA, in which case they never got training. Someone just showed them how to launch and never really actually taught them how to fly their glider. Because like the stuff that you're hearing right now, most people just don't hear it. Oh, I'm not supposed to bury the brakes? Now, another thing which causes stall is actually crappy gliders that don't turn. This is a pretty common one I've talked about quite a bit. Where if you buy some of the low-end brand of gliders that are really doggy and they don't like to turn, what happens is people get in a pressure situation and they expect that glider to turn when they tell it to. So they start adding more and more and more brake to get the glider to turn. All the while they're expecting their glider to turn until they end up adding so much brake that they stall the glider before it turns. That's very common with very doggy gliders. Like a guy recently died on a Black Hawk. Well, he was flying a Paratoys glider, which is a fake Chinese copy of a 10-year-old Mac Para Muse. I mean, just an ancient, it's not even, it's not a certified glider, it's a completely outdated piece of junk and a Chinese copy of it to boot. So people expect it to turn, but it doesn't, so they add more brake expecting to turn, and they end up spinning or stalling their glider before they get a turn. The K2, if you stuff a brake, it's going to flip and point straight at the ground, and so you're going to let off because it's going to do exactly what you told it to, and it's going to respond. So you're far less likely to stall a glider that responds when you tell it to. Does that make sense? So having a responsive glider is actually to your benefit. Some of the theory in the past was to put beginners on gliders that don't respond so that they don't accidentally stall it. But if it doesn't respond, they just keep adding more and more brake until it does. And they end up getting a stall before it responds. Okay, let's see. Count turbulence. Let the glider fly, brake for turbulence. Dust devils. If you see dust devils,
You're in trouble.
probably shouldn't be flying. Sometimes the cross-country pilots, will fly in midday thermals like that where you can see dust devils on the ground. They're very, very dangerous. It's basically a mini tornado. The team captain, the U.S. team captain for the cross-country team, explained turbulence to me when I was coming up through the sport. His definition was turbulence was when you're above your glider looking down at the top side of your glider. That is turbulence. So if you happen to be above your glider looking down at the top of your glider, then you must be experiencing turbulence at that time.
Oh, gee.
So
Experiencing something more than that.
yeah, if you're seeing dust devils, you probably don't want to be in the sky or anywhere near them, because that is some seriously active thermic activity that's going on. Okay, a gust front. Gust fronts are extremely dangerous. One of the most dangerous things in the sport. Probably not quite as bad as rotor, because rotor can seriously trash your fanny, but a gust front would probably be my number 2 fear in the sport. Because you could be flying along and then all of a sudden the wind very rapidly picks up to 35 to 45 miles an hour and you're in the worst trashy nightmare, catastrophically horrible conditions you can possibly imagine. And gust fronts can hit you completely out of the blue. You could be flying in perfectly smooth air, not a ripple in the sky, and then all of a sudden, wham! So you've got to be very careful. Things to look for a gust front. You can generally see a gust front coming. If you look out across, say, a lake, you could see ripples on the lake approaching you. If you're flying in the desert, you could look out and see dust being kicked up on the horizon, because 35 and 40 mile an hour winds is going to kick up dust, brush, all kinds of things in the air. So if you see dust being kicked up on the horizon or see that approaching you, you should land immediately, get out of the sky. If you're in a forested area, you would see the trees moving. So you want to keep your eye on your environment and keep your head up. You don't want to be looking down so much you don't notice something like a gust front approaching you. Now, another thing about a gust front is the leading edge will be very, very turbulent. That first initial impact is going to be pretty violent, generally, and extremely turbulent. There's there's a whole lot of things to talk about in the gust front. So if all of a sudden you're flying and you feel it start to get extremely turbulent all at once, that might not actually be a good time to land, because you might want to wait out the leading edge of that gust front. It's a difficult thing to call without ever seeing it, but I'm just making you aware. I have actually been in that experience several times. Okay, so another thing you'll feel when a front is coming can often be a drastic change in temperature. So you're flying along and all of a sudden you kind of feel the air change temperature and start to become active. Might be a good sign to land. Another thing would be if you're flying along and all of a sudden the wind dramatically changes direction. So if you're flying along and the wind's coming from one direction, and then all of a sudden it picks up and starts coming from another direction, that would be a sign you could be getting hit by a gust front, because a gust front could overpower the base layer of wind. So you could have a nice steady 4 mile an hour breeze coming from one direction, and if all of a sudden it starts blowing 8 miles an hour from a different direction, you could have a gust front coming. You want to be able to determine if the conditions are changing. If you feel the conditions start changing dramatically, if you can make a quick landing no matter where you are, it might be a good idea to get out of the sky, because you do not want to get hit with a gust front. Now, if you happen to still be in the sky when you get hit with just the craziest amount of turbulence you can imagine, that might not be a good idea to land at that particular time. Because if you try and land in psychotic, crazy turbulence, you know, you might impact the ground, and it could be even more dangerous than staying in the sky. So if you can land and get on the ground safely, do it. If not, climb and get up as high away from the ground as you can so that you can ride out the storm, should we say. Another thing would be to turn and go with it and try and outrun it. Because if you're moving 24 miles an hour, you're going to be going 24 miles an hour faster than the air that you're in. So you may be able to outrun the wind. Because even if you're in air going 100 miles an hour, you're going 124 miles an hour. So you might be able to outfly the gust front. And if you can get out in front of it, you may be able to then quickly land and outrun the gust front. I know people who have done that on hang gliders and paragliders, and that's something that is possible and a consideration. Another thing you might consider if you get caught in a gust front would be to fly out over a body of water so that you can ditch in the water and have a more safe landing. Because if you're in 35, 40 mile an hour winds, you don't exactly want to land in that kind of turbulence on the dirt and get dragged across the rocks. You might get killed after you land. Although the flat top is equipped with a quick release harness specifically for situations like that. But landing in the water may be another consideration. If you fly out over the water and try and wait out the leading edge and hopes that you just get the body of the faster moving air that will be less turbulent than the leading edge of the gust front. If you wait it out over the water, if you do take a collapse that ends up taking you all the way to the ground and you have to throw your reserve, being over water is going to be a much safer area. Another thing would be a wooded area. If you are in horrible, wicked turbulence, it would be much better off to be over the trees than it would over rocks and dirt. Because if you take a collapse and pound into the ground, the odds of living if you land in the trees are incredibly good compared to the odds of landing on dirt and rocks. So, yeah, they put you in a little box and cover you over with dirt and rocks. Okay, so dirt and rocks, bad. Water would be my first choice if I'm going to crash. Trees would be my second choice if I'm going to crash. Okay, so the gust front, you want to pay attention in hopes to catch that one's coming. Look for ripples on the water. Look for the grass moving violently off in the distance. Look for dust and dirt and debris being kicked up off of the ground. I mean, if you see a sandstorm coming, it's probably a good idea to land before it gets to you. Look for the trees swaying. Anything that you can find that will signify high winds off in the distance can give you an opportunity to land before it comes. The temperature change, the wind direction change, a change in the weather. If things just start dramatically becoming different than what they were, might be a good idea to land quickly and wait it out and see what's going to happen with the wind. If you do get caught in a gust front, and you're in wicked crazy turbulence, you might consider not landing. Climb immediately as high as you can. By hitting the throttle, it will actually give you a increased angle of attack and give you more stability to the wing. So if you encounter turbulence, mash the throttle and you start climbing, you might not want to climb full throttle, but maybe like half to 2/3 throttle to give yourself a higher angle of attack and give you more stability. And it also gives you more altitude in case you do take a collapse or eventually need to throw your reserve. You want to be up as high away from the ground as you can get. Give yourself room to deal with it. If you can wait out the leading edge of the gust front, sometimes it will smooth out after that initial front passes, and you could just end up with high winds as opposed to extremely turbulent high winds. If you do end up where you're in high winds, wicked turbulent conditions, you may seek out, climb over the water, get over the trees, try and find a place where if you do crash, you're less likely to die as opposed to landing on jagged rocks below. So that would be the difference. Okay, Virga. What is Virga? Virga is one of those things that if you see it, you probably should not be flying. Virga is when you look off in the distance and you see the rain that's falling from the clouds, but it doesn't touch the ground yet. Virga is very bad because you get cold air, thick air that's dumping out of the clouds, and that can create microbursts and gust fronts. So if you see Virga, you should probably consider getting out of the sky. And Virga, you know, could affect you from miles and miles and miles away. So if you see conditions like that, those are very, very dangerous. Virga looks like streaks of gray and darkness under a cloud that looks like rain that's falling that may not have necessarily touched the ground yet, or it may even touch the ground. You can see like a huge squall line coming at you. Again, another thing to be aware of, something that's you don't exactly want to fly with. If you're going out to fly for the day and you see Virga, you may consider waiting until the Virga is gone or simply not flying that day. A venticular cloud. A venticular cloud can warn you of high winds. Those are the clouds when you look up on top of a hill or possibly a mountain and you see an hourglass shape or a reverse hourglass shape that looks like an eyeball, very, very sleek cloud with a hump in the middle, would be a sign of very high winds going over the ridge, or high winds aloft. So if you see a lenticular cloud, that would generally be a sign of high winds aloft. Again, you might want to double check the weather, check the winds at different altitudes. You know for sure if you see a lenticular cloud that there's high winds aloft, so you might want to just scratch flying that day, depending on, you know, different attitudes of the weather. If it's high enough and far enough away, it might not concern you, but you do want to take it into effect when you're thinking about flying. Thunderstorms. Of course, horribly bad. Those can knock a 744 out of the sky. So you don't want to be flying in close proximity or even far proximity to thunderstorms. So another thing you do when you check the weather would be to check the radar. Look at the radar, the green and red specks. If you see red and yellow, it may not be mellow. So, red and yellow means it is not mellow. Look at the radar. If you've got thunderstorms coming or anywhere within 75 miles of you, they can create gust fronts and wicked turbulence. And they can also, as they're first developing, they can create lift that's so violent you cannot get down. Several people have died by flying into a thunderstorm that's building and been sucked up into the cloud clear to 30,000 feet and froze to death and been found as an icicle on the ground miles and miles away from home. One lady actually lived through it, went up to 30,000 foot, passed out unconscious, and then ended up getting out of it somehow and regained consciousness later. And they checked her altimeter and she had been over 30,000 feet and really should be dead. Wow. But she somehow lived through that. So yeah, you want to be very, very careful. If you see thunderstorms, probably not the day to fly. You can also check to see if there's thunderstorm warnings. If there's a possibility of thunderstorms, you might not want to fly.
Do you guys have like thunderstorms? all that kind of stuff on a consistent basis?
Yes.
Where you're from? Back
Yeah,
east?
thunderstorms happen pretty much everywhere. So thunderstorms are just something you have to work out for. Now, thunderstorms do take hours to build, so it's not like they're gonna pop out of nowhere. So if you see a cloud overdeveloping or a cumulus cloud that has a huge anvil on top of it and it's billowing and billowing and growing upwards and looks like it goes up to 30,000 feet, and you see dark black clouds or dark bottoms, look for any signs of a thunderstorm. Now, if you have high clouds, like a cloud layer, you could have thunderstorms that are concealed, which is why it would be important to check the radar. Because if you run into a concealed thunderstorm where there's lots of clouds and you can't tell if one's there, well, you should have checked the weather to make sure you don't run into that. That's something you definitely want to avoid at all costs and stay away from. Thunderstorms, bad plan. They can kill you dead and ruin your whole life. Okay. Okay, feeling a gust front coming, we talked about. Be prepared for anything, anytime, because crap happens. I just added that in there.
But it does.
Yeah, because, you know, we talked about you can check the weather, you can do everything, you can follow every single rule, and crap still happens. So your number one line of defense is equipment and training. If you fly the safest equipment possible and have the very best training, it gives you the odds of overcoming any situation. I've been flying like a lunatic for 10 years, and the worst I've ever done is, you know, a bruise or a sprain or, you know, a scraped knee. So I've been hit with gust fronts. The glider, the equipment, if you get the right equipment, it's incredibly safe. Because a K2, even in a full stall, a certified glider has a descent rate of only about 20 foot per second. That's like jumping off your garage roof. With 16, 18 inches of crumple zone under you, like the flat top, it's a pretty much non-life-threatening situation. So it's nice to be confident in knowing that your equipment is really going to save your butt if crap happens. And it's another thing, be very leery of flying crap equipment or totally uncertified gliders. Sometimes people are a little quick to upgrade to higher performance gliders that are totally uncertified, and those totally uncertified gliders are not going to save your butt. They're going to expect you to do everything right. They're not going to be anywhere near as forgiving as a good certified beginner glider. Same with paramotors. If you get a paramotor that has no crumple zone or protection from the prop, you're just asking for something, because crap will happen. The question of what's going to happen afterwards will be determined by your equipment, because you can lose control on any equipment. So the outcome of losing control will be determined by the equipment you purchased. Okay, Mamata. This is not your friend. Mamata is boobies in the sky. Boobies are bad, or we could call them breasts. If you see cupped, breast-shaped, dark clouds, it is a sign of great instability, and it would not be a time to be in the sky. So thunderstorms, virga, gust fronts, dust devils, and mamata, or lenticulars could all be signs you definitely don't want to fly that day. Mamata or breasts are fairly easy to recognize. Those round, cup-shaped dark clouds that you see up in the sky tell you to go away. Dust in the air, we kind of talked about that one a little bit, But if you walk out and you see the sky's kind of hazy and there's a lot of dust in the sky, it's a good sign that there's high winds or serious activity going on, or possibly a gust front just passed through. There's a reason that that dust that would normally be on the ground is up in the sky. So you got to pay attention to the sky and how it looks and what it's telling you. Watch for wind coming on the water or kicking up dust. We talked about that. You got to watch for a gust front coming and be aware of the signs that something is approaching you. Can't get into your seat. Okay. Here's one, a little bit more on equipment and or a different type of scenario. So when you launch and you get off the ground, you then need to get into your seat and get the seat board underneath your butt so you're sitting comfortably in the chair. Because when you first take off, you're going to be hanging from your crotch. And it is not fun hanging from your wing. So if you're hanging from your nads, you're gonna not be happy. Now, sometimes you might take off and it's impossible to get in your seat, which, if you don't fly a flat top, most of the units on the market, they do not have the up-to-date designs. So if you take off, you will physically have to get into your seat in some form or matter. The flat top, if you don't adjust the harness properly, you could also be in a scenario where you can't get into your seat. If you can't get in your seat, you would climb to a higher altitude, snap your brake toggles into the magnets. Don't just let go of them and let them flail. Snap the brake toggles into the magnets, and then you can reach down and try and pull yourself in the seat. But pay attention to where your cage is and where your risers are, because if you lean way forward trying to get in your seat, you can lean your cage right into the risers, and it's possible to put your brake toggles into the prop and or risers and or lines. You got to be very, very careful that you don't stick anything in the prop while you're trying to get into your seat. If you can't get in your seat, then just come around and make a safe landing and figure out what the problem is. A lot of people have died from not being able to get in their seat, and or purchasing paramotors or free-flying equipment where they had to let go of the controls to get into their seat. The reason is that's one of the most dangerous times to let go of the controls is right after launch. Because if you're below 30 feet and you take a collapse, it's very common that you could actually hit the ground before the collapse recovers. So if you get a unit where you literally have to let go of the controls to get in your seat, imagine taking off, you're only 15 feet off the ground, you let go of the controls, you're trying to get in your seat, and you take a major collapse with no hands on the controls. Horribly bad scenario, extremely important to get a paramotor that is designed to make it as easy as possible to get in your seat. In a free-flying harness, we will generally fly with a kick strap where you can use your feet to push on a stirrup that will help you kick yourself up and into your seat so that you don't have to let go of your controls. Really, really bad plan to take off and let go of the controls right after getting off the ground. That, you can just think of that one. Pay attention to where your reserve is. Don't knock it off. You have to use your head. If you've got a reserve installed on your unit, which you for sure should, you want to make sure that when you're flaring or turning or controlling your glider that you don't accidentally knock the reserve handle off of your reserve container so you don't accidentally deploy your reserve. So use your head and think about what you're doing and pay attention to your reserve. Your reserve, you should have a healthy response respect for. Check it before you launch. Check it after you launch. Check it after you land, and make sure your reserve is set up properly and not hanging out and about to fall out and cause an accidental reserve deployment. Now, I personally do not know one single person who has ever been injured or killed from an accidental reserve deployment. So the odds are very, very slim that that would injure or cause you, and even slimmer that it's even going to happen. So not a big deal, but definitely have a healthy respect for your reserve. Far more likely to save your life than it is to cause you a problem. So guaranteed, absolutely, for sure, mandatory, make sure you always fly with a reserve. Extremely important. Hook knife is a handy piece of equipment to have. If you go in the water, it is very easy to get tangled in your lines. Even if you have a quick release harness, like on your flat top, you might get out of the unit, but then it's easy to get tangled up in the lines in the water, because as you kick and try and tread water, you can have the lines wrap around you and tangle you up and wad you up like a ball and drown your frickin' butt into the ground and you die. Okay, just to be a little dramatic. So we try and avert this by carrying a hook knife. Now, since you bought a flat top and a reserve, which would come with your flat top, you have a hook knife installed in the front of your reserve container. There's a little pouch that you can grab with your left hand. The hook knife should have been installed so that the little barb on the handle sticks away from you so that it will hook your fingers as you slide the knife out. If you're going to go in the water, you may consider pulling out that hook knife and having it ready. Another thing for a hook knife is if you happen to land in high winds and you're getting drug. Very bad plan to get drug across the rocks or drug into a car or drug across the barbed wire fence. That hook knife could save your life. Make sure you've got a hook knife. Very, very important. Hook knife good should be standard safety equipment. If you purchased a flat top with a Super Rescue or Super Mini Rescue, you will have a hook knife already installed on your equipment. I put it there because I love you and I want you to have all your safety equipment, and it's nice that everybody that purchases the flat top and flat top type equipment will have their hook knife in the exact same spot. So if you fly your buddy's flat top, his hook knife and reserve should be mounted exactly like yours is to create uniformity and improve safety. Getting drug, landing in high winds. Good plan to have a hook knife, and or better yet, have the proper glider for the amount of wind that you have and proper skills so that you know how to prevent from getting drug. During your actual training, we will go over the ground handling considerably on how to control your paraglider to prevent yourself from getting drug. Now, a couple things that I do is I always try and fly the smallest and fastest glider that I can easily launch. That way, I have the most penetration and speed in case the wind picks up. If you fly the biggest glider and in your weight range, then you're not going to be able to fly as fast, and so if the wind picks up, it's more easy to end up in a scenario where you're flying backwards. And if you end up in wind like that, it's pretty easy to get drug. Now, if you're a new pilot, though, you do want to stay fairly close to your weight range for safety, because the glider is designed to be the safest in its designated weight range. It is certified for that specific weight. So you kind of have a balancing there. Kind of like skydiving, you might start with an extra large, but then as you gain skill, you might move down to a large, down to a medium, down to a small. I personally fly a small. That's my personal weapon of choice. And the reason I generally fly a small is for more stability and more penetration and wind, so that if the wind does pick up, you don't get drug. Doohickeys on your paramotor. I do not like doohickeys all over my frickin' paramotor. People put you know, head temperature gauge, RPM gauge, exhaust gas temperature gauge, altimeter, cameras. You get little doohickeys all over your frickin' paramotor, and people don't think about how that can affect your safety. It is very common for people to install something on their unit and it to cause a problem and even cause them to crash. I know a guy that broke his shoulder because his camera mount snagged a line on launch and threw him into a turn, and he pounded into the ground. So you have to be very careful of having doohickeys and adding things to your paramotor. In general aviation, you pretty much can't add anything to your aircraft. It has to be added by a certified mechanic, and then you have to have the aircraft recertified for what you're modifying.
Anything, weight, balance, radio, you name it, you gotta get it.
Yeah, weight and balance, all sort of different things are affected by any change you do for your aircraft. So don't be dicking around with your paramotor or modifying it or changing it or adding things or strapping bags onto the side of your comfort bar or adding camera mounts. You have to be very, very careful, because all of those little things, they could, like your radio, for example, if your wire goes into the prop, you now have a 25 horsepower winch that's going to rip your head off and cut your head clean off if your radio wire goes around your neck and then into the propeller. Or perhaps it's your camera and you've got it on a lanyard and it falls and wraps into the prop. There are so many things that can go wrong with having doohickeys all over your paramotor. So I would be very, very careful about doing that. There have been many injuries caused by that very simple thing. People go out, they buy some funky gauge, they bolt it onto the side of their frame, they go to launch, it hooks on a line, all of a sudden it's pulling a huge collapse, and I mean, it's just a bad plan. So doohickeys on your paramotor, bad plan. How to check your gas. How much gas do you have? The flat top's pretty nice because you can physically look at the gas tank. If you lean your head over to the side, you can generally look straight down at your gas tank and determine how much gas you have. Sometimes if you have a helmet or a thick jacket, I will stick my head in between the risers and the cage all the way over and look down at my gas tank. Other times, you can grab your jacket, pull it tight against your body, and then look right down past your hips, right down at the top of the gas tank. If you play with that, you should be able to figure out how to look at your gas and keep an eye on that. You want to definitely pay attention to your fuel level so that you don't run out of gas. That would be pretty stupid to have your aircraft run out of gas as you're doing a foot drag down a river.
Or landing on a glacier.
Yeah, or landing on a glacier. It does happen. Don't do that. Check your gas. If you can't figure it out, call me. Okay, predicting fuel usage. It's a good idea. I personally like to always fly with an absolutely full tank of gas filled to the exact same level. If you don't fill your tank all the way up, it's hard to get a good gauge for exactly how long your gas is going to last and how far you can fly. But if you always fill your tank to the exact same level every single time you fly, you can start to gauge a good idea of how long your motor is going to run with that particular level of fuel. Again, this is something that does cause a lot of problems that are really basic, and if you use some common sense, they're easy to avoid. Learn how efficient your motor is with any particular glider on which particular setting. If you change your glider and it has a different level of efficiency, for example, if you go from an extra large glider down to a small, you're going to burn more gas. Or if you're flying with the speed system on, accelerated, you're going to burn more gas. Or if you tune your carb, you're going to burn a different amount of gas than before you tuned your carburetor. Sometimes you might change your muffler. That could change the level of tuning and how much gas you burn. You might change a prop, and if it has a different pitch and runs at a different RPM, might change the level of gas. There's lots of different things to think about. Don't run out of gas or you are a moron. Fuel reserve planning. For me personally, for an example, depending on which motor, your motor might generally go 2 hours on a tank of gas. So if your gas lasts about 2 hours of flying, sometimes I will plan to fly 45 minutes out so that 45 minutes back gives me an hour and a half of flying and leaves me hopefully a half an hour of gas left. Now I have run out at an hour and 14 minutes. So your gas doesn't necessarily always last the same amount, and there could be wind factors flying into the wind or with the wind that can dramatically change it. But you always want to try and leave some margin for error and pay attention to your fuel. Building your own paramotor or trike. There are plans on the internet on how to build your paramotor, and they say how easy it is. If you build your own aircraft when you don't even know how to fly, you are a moron. You're a freaking idiot. You probably went through the WPPGA. Yeah. There are all sorts of factors and variables and thousands of different incidents that have happened in the industry, and if you don't have a vast level of experience, there's no possible way you can know everything that has happened and what is going to happen to you and how to design your paramotor in order to prevent all of the main problems. So do not build your own paramotor. If you get 10,000 flights under your belt, then maybe you could consider talking about it. But do not build your own aircraft. Do not modify your aircraft. I get that one quite often. People call me up and they go, oh, well, hey, I know how to change it and make it better. If you don't have experience flying, do not change or modify your aircraft in any way. In general aviation, you do not modify your aircraft. It is illegal. You don't do it. Why?
Put carpet in it.
You can't even put carpet in your airplane because everything you do can affect things that you may not know about. So you need to have someone who is extremely experienced and knowledgeable that can do the modification or change it. So if you have an idea, ask the designer and talk to knowledgeable people. Do not go modifying your own paramotor. Do not build your own aircraft without knowledge. That's just stupid, and it gets people injured and killed quite often. So if you're watching this video, hopefully you bought a flat top because you are not a moron. You're not planning on building your own unit. Now, a lot of the units out there have been built by some idiot. So the only thing worse than building your own aircraft would be buying it from some idiot who built it. Think about that one. Don't get an aircraft built by a moron. Okay, tuning for altitude. As you go up in altitude, you will get less air. So that means you get more fuel and your motor will run richer. So as you go up in altitude, dramatically, you may need to lean out your mixture. If you go down in altitude, you're going to get more oxygen and therefore less fuel, and your engine will start running leaner. Now, running a richer mixture generally doesn't hurt anything and won't really mess up your engine other than it might not run properly. But if you tune your motor for higher altitude and then go to lower altitude without retuning it, your motor could run lean and blow up and you could die. Okay, so don't do that. So you got to keep in mind, if you're going down in altitude, down is dangerous. Going down in altitude means your motor's going to be running leaner and your engine could overheat and fail. So be very, very careful. Make sure if you go down in altitude that you retune your motor for that altitude. Very, very important.
So if you addressed it at sea level, 100, 600 feet, sea level, 500 feet, what's your, what would be the point that you would start bubbling on you?
I have actually had my motor tuned for sea level and climbed clear to 18,000 feet without tuning it. So you can make, with this particular configuration, like the flat top with the Simonini engine and a Walbro 37 carburetor, it takes a pretty big variance in altitude going up to really mess you up. When I hit 18,182 feet, my motor bogged. So that kind of gives you an idea. If you have a temperature change of, say, 100 degrees, you also might need to tune your motor. So if you tune your motor when it's 100 degrees out, and then all of a sudden in winter it's 0 degrees, again, you might have to retune your motor. So a large change in altitude or temperature, you probably will want to double check and make sure that your motor is tuned properly. Or if you go from high altitude to low altitude, you definitely want to check the tuning on your motor and richen it up a little bit so that you don't have a problem of frying your motor. Okay, fuel oil mixture. This will depend on your aircraft. You probably want to check with your owner's manual and or talk to the manufacturer and or the person who is training you that can train you properly. With the Simonini engine, the manual states 32-to-1 oil mixture, and you want to run 32-to-1. It is extremely important. I have a boatload of experience and have run hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of engines. If you run at a 40-to-1 oil mixture on a Simonini, your failure rate could go up to as high as 1 in 8 engines. So you have a 1 in 8 chance your motor could seize at 40-to-1 or higher. At 32-to-1, the failure rate is approximately 1 in 150. So it makes a big, big difference. So you want to run 32-to-1 oil to fuel mixture. Glide ratio and how it helps safety. Well, what your glide ratio is basically how far you come down for how far you go. The glide ratio depends on your glider, the weight you're putting under the glider, and the speed at which you're flying. A good efficient gliders of today are pushing 10-to-1 glide ratios. So for every 1 foot you come down, you go 10 foot forward. Well, that means if you're a mile up 5,200 feet, you can glide nearly 10 miles before you come down. That makes a big difference as far as safety, because if you have a motor out, it's going to give you a much farther distance that you can glide before you have to land. So it gives you more options on places to land. If you have a very poor glide ratio, you're not going to have anywhere near as much distance that you can go. Now there's two different things. There's glide ratio and there's sink rate, and they are very different but interact similarly. Generally, the glide ratio stays pretty much the same no matter how much weight you put on the glider. So if you add 100 pounds to your paraglider, the glide ratio is going to be about the same. But the sink rate is going to change dramatically. The sink rate is how fast you're losing altitude. The glide ratio is how far you're going for how far you come down. So if you add 100 pounds to your glider, you're going to fly much faster, so you're going to fall and sink much faster, but you'll still probably glide about the same distance for how far you are in altitude. So keep that in mind as far as the weight and the difference between glide ratio and sink rate.
Altitude is your friend.
Altitude is your friend, definitely. The more altitude you have, the farther you can glide, and the more time you have to figure out any problem and or find a good safe place to land.
Where do you typically fly out as your standard blueprint?
The standard altitude that I will fly at is about 1 or 2 inches.
I hear you say that.
So,
If you're not dragging your feet.
okay, probably 95% of the time, I'm below 10 feet. Now, the reason I say that, it depends on the speed of the wind and the terrain. If I'm going to be flying over rough, jagged rocks, you're not going to see me flying at 10 foot. I'm going to be much, much, much higher. But generally, if I fly over a terrain like desert, where I've got sand, dirt, and sagebrush below me, then I'm not too concerned if I have a motor out because I can land anywhere. If I'm going to fly over the trees, if I go flying in Virginia, you're not going to see me flying 2 inches off the treetops because a motor out will put me in the trees. So it depends on the terrain you're flying over as to the altitude that you can safely land. But it goes right back to the always have a safe landing area in range. Well, if you're flying over a big patch of sand, well, you can fly 1 inch off the ground because you can safely land anywhere immediately. And that's why I generally fly at lower altitudes. It's based only on the terrain that I'm flying over. So no matter what, always have a safe landing zone within gliding distance. Even if you're only at 1 foot, you better be over something that you can land on immediately.
And you really fly most of the time that low, huh?
Yes, because paragliding, one of the funnest things about this sport is that we can safely fly very close to the ground because of our low speed and the ability to slow down even further. With a paraglider, even in zero wind, you can land at basically, a fast walking speed in zero wind. So if you're flying 1 foot off the ground and your motor dies, the odds of getting injured or killed is very, very, very low, pretty much zero. Just depends on the terrain that you're flying over. If you're flying over a field of razor blades, you may consider flying high enough so that you can glide beyond the razor blade field. So yeah, there's nothing funner. I mean, that's one of the funnest things about the sport is flying low and slow, because we can, and we can do it safely. In an airplane at 200 miles an hour, if you hit the ground, you're going to die. So it's not an acceptable risk to fly 1 foot off the ground. You just don't do it. Where a paraglider, we can do that. As you gain experience and the ability to land safely, it makes it really fun because you can fly low to the ground. Motor mount failure. This is something that should not affect your flat top anymore. Pretty much all the paramotors on the market, the engine is held on only with rubber. Yes, your motor is held on with rubber bands. That is actually true. So if your motor mounts fail, your engine can literally fall off your unit. That is horribly, catastrophically bad. You have to keep an eye on your motor mounts and keep them in good condition and check for cracks. That is a well-known issue in the industry, and numerous catastrophic problems have resulted where engines have fallen off and or motor mounts have broken to where the engine could shift enough for the prop to hit the cage, and when the prop hits the cage, the whole thing catastrophically self-destructs around you, which is why you're lucky you bought a flat top. A flat top is the only unit I know of that has true fail-safe motor mounts. So even if the rubber completely disintegrates, the engine is still bolted on and will not fall off or self-destruct. So on motor mount failure, be happy that you bought a flat top. If you bought an older flat top, you might want to upgrade to the new fail-safe motor mount system. And you might want to know the difference between the two. If you have any questions, definitely call us, because a fail-safe motor mount system can save a lot of headaches that are well known in the industry.
Arts racing.
Okay. Engine falling off. Don't laugh, because if you didn't buy a flat top, this could be you. Very good chance. Shoot, just recently, there's been numerous of these. A guy in a Fresh Breeze, his muffler fell off, fell into the prop. The prop blows up, hits that cage frame, rips the whole thing off. The whole thing just catastrophically self-destructs in air. Frickin' prop blade comes off, goes through his glider, puts a huge hole in his glider, and the dude has to glide back down with this cage and stuff like wrapped around his head. Somehow lived. Blackhawk, same sort of thing. Kaput. Engine falling off. Not funny. Okay, so keep an eye on your motor mounts. Never mind. You get a flat top. You guys all have flat tops. You all have fail-safe motor mount kits. So I don't even need to put this on. The reason I put this in here is so that you can passionately encourage other people to buy a flat top. Because literally that can and will happen to them if they don't get the updated equipment that has solved that problem. Okay, muffler cracking. Here's another catastrophic failure. Many units are designed with the muffler hanging right in front of the prop. So when the muffler breaks, it falls through the propeller and the whole thing freaking blows up. The flat top is designed with redundant muffler mounts so that if one breaks, you'll hear it rattling and you'll have time to land before the whole thing breaks. If both break, it's positioned behind the reduction, so the muffler should not, the odds are very, very, very slim. I've actually never seen it happen where a flat top muffler goes into the prop, which is very, very slick. But two-stroke engines, you've got a one-cylinder two-stroke engine that makes quite a bit of vibration, and so muffler cracking has been, you know, it basically plagues every motor, and it can happen. We've got the failure rate as low as I've ever seen it, but it's something to keep an eye on and listen for. If you hear your muffler rattling, you know something probably just cracked or is breaking or is coming apart. And that's part of your pre-flight. Check your muffler and look for cracks on your muffler. Spark plug cap falling off. Again, you fly a flat top. You don't have to worry about retardedly stupid asinine stuff like your spark plug cap falling off. Never seen it happen on a flat top, but on many other units, literally, they'll be flying, the spark plug cap falls off the spark plug and the motor dies instantly. Another thing that goes with that is do not buy parts from incompetent morons at the USPPA, because they might sell you replacement parts that have problems like that. So be careful who you buy your replacement parts from. Make sure you get the actual factory parts. I have never ever once in all of my days of flying ever seen a factory spark plug cap fall off of a Simonini engine. But it can happen, so be careful what you're doing. Loose belt. Now this is one that you have to keep an eye on, because your belt will loosen up when it's brand new. It'll start to break in. So it's very common in the first couple of hours you may have to adjust it. Part of your pre-flight, and the easiest way to check your belt, is before and after every flight, you wiggle your prop and prop start it. You shut off your master switch so the engine won't start, and then you spin your prop. You want to try and spin it through 2 or 3 compression cycles. So you spin the prop and it goes pop, 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 pop. And if you can get it to spin through, 2-3 compression cycles, your belt is adjusted properly. If the belt's loose, you might get 1 compression cycle and the belt will slip, and it basically will prevent you from prop starting it. So do that before and after every flight. Pretty simply, you grab the prop, you spin it. Spinning the prop does numerous things. For one, wiggling the prop, you're checking the bearings on the reduction in the engine, so you can feel if there's free play in the bearings. 2, you're checking to make sure your motor mounts are all secure and all the bolts are fastened. You wiggle the prop forwards and backwards, and you can feel that everything is secure on the engine. You can also test and make sure your prop is not cracked, because you can feel that the prop is solid and stiff and is working properly. You can also feel that your prop is bolted on securely. So there's a lot of things. One of your pre-flights, take the prop, wiggle it back and forth, turn the master switch off, and spin it through some prop cycles. Make sure you that your prop is tight. Tightening the belt. You adjust that. There's basically a seat clamp that on the crankcase that locks onto the eccentric pinion of your large reduction. So you'll loosen the bolt that clamps it down, and then turn the bolt that's in the center of your prop to tighten your belt, and you want to make it good and snug. Basically, you just want it tight enough to where you can do the prop starting thing and have it work properly, but not any tighter than that. Because if you make it too tight, you can prematurely wear your bearings. So you tighten it, and then tighten back down the C-clamp and lock it into position. You might have to do that, pretty common, maybe once, maybe twice in your first 15 hours, and then it'll probably stay good for quite a while. With the flat top, your belt should last freaking forever. On a lot of units, your belts will wear out very quickly, and you'll have to replace them quite commonly. But the Simonini on the flat top, the configuration is really nice. We use a nice reduction, and that belt holds up extremely well. But you want to keep an eye on your belt and make sure that that is tight. Another thing is to notice in air if you have a loose belt. If you mash the throttle and you start getting more RPM but no more thrust, your belt is probably loose, and you can hear your reduction. You might hear, and then your engine will spin up, but you're not getting any power. Well, if that happens, you want to make sure you don't go to that level of power. Use less than the amount of power from where that happens, because you can burn up your belt very quickly if you're spinning your reduction inside of that belt. So be very, very careful about your belt not being tight. You really should never have to replace a belt for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, as long as you take care of it and maintain it. So it shouldn't be an issue. Belt squeaking. When you first get your motor, your brand new motor, it's pretty common for your belt to squeak at first. You'll hear chirping, and that's pretty common when you have a good, tight, secure belt and you got a brand new unit. You'll hear the belt chirping when it's brand new. Totally normal. That's okay, and it should break in and you'll stop hearing it chirp like that. bolts going through the prop. Doesn't sound good. For one, you just took a big chunk out of your prop. For two, what exactly was being bolted down by that bolt that just fell out? Common problem though. It does happen. You'll be flying along and all of a sudden you hear whack, and you'll be like, whoa! So if you hear something like that, you should probably land and investigate and try and figure out just went through your prop. Not a good scenario. You both want to find out what happened to hit your prop and where it came from, and check all the bolts on your motor. Now, this is minimal problem with a flat top because all of the bolts are extremely high-end, grade A aircraft bolts, and we use nylock nuts wherever possible so that they don't vibrate off. Very high quality components. With most of the units on the market, they're using the cheapest nickel dime kind of nuts and bolts, and they literally will fall off very commonly. Flat top, the failure rate is as low as I've ever seen, but it is still possible. So if you hear something go whack, you better investigate it. Prop strike 2 feet.
It's gonna hurt.
Remember we talked about don't build your own paramotor? Well, some incompetent morons who fail to obey that rule, I have literally watched them trip and fall down and have their prop hit their foot. One of those things of, don't build your own equipment. I mean, if you buy a flat top, the designer laid down on the ground and tried in every possible way to put their foot into the prop and did not find it humanly possible or feasible. So you really don't have to worry about that with your unit. But to be a good, well-educated and well-rounded pilot, you need to know that many of the units on the market, you could put your foot into the prop if you trip and fall down. So be very careful about what unit you fly. Don't borrow your buddy's piece of crap, and make sure you highly recommend and encourage people to get proper equipment, because that can and will happen and is a known issue in the industry. Okay, pull starting safety procedures. Again, a flat top, you really don't have to worry about it so much, but quite commonly that is one of the more common ways people get chopped up in their own prop, is when they're pull starting their non-flat top. When they're pull starting it, they're standing in front of it and they're holding it, which is a no-no. It's best to start it on your back or on, if you have it clamped in to the, on a ground or secured. But with a flat top, it doesn't really matter too much, because even if it goes full throttle, a flat top will fall to the comfort bars. The flat top also has a Kung Fu grip, which will put you in a Jiu-Jitsu wrist lock and throw your butt to the ground. Can't imagine who designed that in there. But I have actually personally watched a person chop their fingers off. The unit lurched at them and they let go of their secure handhold and reached for a higher position. It's a natural instinct. So the flat top has what is called the Kung Fu grip, which is right between the parts where the harness attaches. The gap in that hole is made a specific height so your hand barely fits in there. So if the flat top tilts forward, which it would do if it lurches at you, it will actually lock your hand in there, which will prevent you from letting go and reaching for a different handhold up higher where you're more likely to stick your hand in the prop. So numerous features on the flat top prevent you from putting your hand into a less than safe area, although the flat top will also support 200 pounds, basically more than the entire thrust of the unit, will more likely than support it right on the netting. So the odds of getting your hand in the prop on a flat top, very slim to none. But pull starting procedures, you got to be really careful if you don't have a flat top. With a flat top, just use your head. Don't be starting it with papers laying around or anything that can get sucked into the prop. You may not think that certain objects can fly, But when you have 196 pounds of thrust, you would be amazed at what objects can actually fly with that amount of thrust. Straps, bags, cups, saucers, plates. You might have something laying on the ground and you're doing your motor run up and you go to full throttle and it sucks the stuff into the prop, which, can be really bad, especially straps like your leg straps or stuff. If you've got them just laying loose or you don't have your Velcro attached properly and you go full throttle and it sucks the Velcro into the prop, you've got to make sure you keep everything away from the prop when you go to start your motor because it has a boatload of thrust. Okay, prop starting. The official statement would be don't ever prop start your motor. But it can be prop started. It can be prop started quite easily. One of the first things people like to do when they look at your paramotor and they go, oh, that's cool. They grab the prop and they turn it.
Oh, nice.
The other very common thing for people to do is to pick up your throttle and press the button. So,
Seriously?
Don't touch my stuff.
totally serious. They cannot resist pushing the frickin' button. I have heard of stories of people that have their flat top on the rack on the back of their vehicle, went to the supermarket, came out, and their motor was running. Somebody has pressed the button. So make sure you disconnect it and or turn the master switch off, and be aware if you have children or young people or incompetent morons such as any USPPA people around your unit, they will likely pick up the throttle, stick their head in the prop, and press the button. It happens. Be very, very careful of that. Okay, back to prop starting. Nice thing about the certain units like the Simonini is it's actually fairly easy to prop start if you ever did need to do that. Remember, the official policy is don't ever do it or you're going to chop your head off and kill everyone within 100 miles. But if you do want to risk your own life and limb and the life of everyone within 100 miles, the way you would do it would be grab about halfway or a little more down the prop. I see people take like one finger, put it at the very tip, and like throw the prop like 6 inches and expect it to start the unit. No, if you want to start the unit, you need to run it through about 2 or 3 compression cycles. So you got to reach your hand about more than halfway down the prop towards the hub and spin the prop about 2/3 of a turn. So 3/4 of a spin. You got to get a good solid spin, and then of course whip your hand away from it at the end of the stroke. So you got to get 2 to 3 compression cycles in order to get it to fire. But they do prop start pretty easy if you ever do need to do it. Kind of like jump starting a car. If it's in gear and you push it, it will fire up. Crap in carburetor. Motor dies. This problem, I believe, has been minimized dramatically. In the past, the fuel filter that was used was one of those brass fuel filters that was something like an 80 micron or something like that, or 125. Anyway, in the past, the fuel filters would not necessarily filter everything out, and over time you could have dust and hair and very small fine debris build up on the little screen inside your carburetor. So all of a sudden you're flying around and it feels like you're running out of gas and it doesn't want to run properly at full throttle. And then it'll start working its way down where it stops running at half throttle, and then it goes down to quarter throttle until where your motor completely dies. So you got to be very careful of crap building up inside your carburetor. There's a little screen inside of there and it collects. On top of the carburetor, there's 4 bolts. If you remove the 4 screws, take off the top of the carburetor, take off the membrane, spray it out with WD-40 or some fuel, you can clean out that little screen and make sure you keep that running properly and running clean. The latest version of flat tops come with a new, much tighter fuel filter, a much bigger and more efficient fuel filter, and I have not experienced a motor out because of that since, but it's something that can and will happen, so it's just something to be aware of. You also want to make sure that you're careful about getting crap in your fuel in the first place, because if you get sand or dirt, you're at the beach, you get crap inside your fuel, you know, or you just get some dirty gas. You know, keep an eye on your gas can. Look at the bottom of your gas can after it's empty and see if you're getting crap inside of your gas can that you're using. If you get some in there, you know, maybe put a little bit of fuel in the bottom and flush it out, and keep your gas can clean so you're running as little crap as possible through your motor. Because if you fly on crap, crap can happen. One-way valve sticking, not letting air into the tank. Now, one of the cool things about the flat top is it has a one-way valve on the gas tank. In years and years and years ago, it used to have a breather hose. So there was an open hose that allowed air in and out of the gas tank. Problem was, when you leaned way over forwards to do your motor run up, gasoline would douse the pilot. Most of the units on the market still today are just like that. If you trip and fall down, expect to be covered with gas. There will be fuel everywhere. Don't light a match or you will be a torch ball, which has also happened, but not on a flat top. So the flat top has a one-way valve which will allow air into the gas tank but will not allow fuel out of the gas tank. So if you tip it upside down, you should not get any fuel leaks. You also don't get fuel fumes. So if you put it in your car, you won't get the gas smell like you do with an air hose that'll allow gas fumes freely to circulate through your vehicle. But if you happen to be flying and notice your gas tank squish up like a raisin, it is possible that your one-way valve is now a no-way valve and air is going nowhere. So just be aware of that, and it is, you know, not a bad idea to test that every once in a while and make sure air will freely flow into your tank but will not escape your tank. One-way valve. Don't land in a field with bulls, lions, tigers, bears, mountain lions, or big freaking apes or transvestites.
Eliminate San Francisco.
Yeah, so be careful where you land, because if you fall down butt side up, a bull may get excited. Now, you may laugh, and it sounds funny, that this has happened. People have been injured. They land in a field with a bull, and bull do not like big bright red paragliders. So you land in the field and the bull charges you. Anyway, pay attention to where you're landing and make sure you're not landing in a zoo with lots of bears. It would be bad. Also, another plan is don't piss off the moose. Because if you buzz the moose and the elk and the violent animals that could kill you, and then you happen to have a motor out right about there and you crash into the ground, they may maul you and kick your butt. Don't know if you've ever seen the YouTube video of the hunter that got his butt kicked by a deer, but it was very entertaining, and they sometimes will take vengeance. So use your head on where you're landing and be aware there are vicious dogs and different types of things where you could be in big trouble. Farmers, yeah, farmers. You might get farmers coming after you too. Failed launch, shut off motor. If you abort your launch, shut off your motor. Paragliders are delicious and engines love them. It is a delicacy to props. So if you abort your launch, you got to turn off your motor for numerous reasons. For one, it could destroy your paraglider, but for two, you've got Kevlar lines that'll hold 400, 500, 600 pounds on one line with a 30 horsepower engine cranking, winching that Kevlar line into the prop. So if you were to get a line around your head that then goes into the prop and the engine, it could theoretically cut you in half. So be very, very careful. If you screw up, abort a landing, or a launch, or you trip and fall down, learn where your kill switch is and learn how to use it. Drill that into your head so that you can hit that kill switch in a pressure situation. If you got a buddy learning how to paramotor as a paraglider pilot, teach him where that kill switch is. The kill switch adds a level of safety and, of course, can save you the cost of destroying your cage as you pull rip Kevlar line right through your cage and frame, and or destroying your paraglider. Kill switch, kill switch, kill switch. Drill it into your brain, find out where that kill switch is, and make it a reflex to hit that kill switch if something goes wrong. Also, if you're flying and something goes weird, hit the kill switch. If you take a collapse, the last thing you want is an engine running that the torque could cause further problems. So if you take a major collapse or something goes funky, hit the kill switch and shut the motor off immediately. That kill switch needs to be a reflex. Do not allow your motor to cause further problems when you can solve it by killing the motor. Landing on pavement versus grass or gravel. Landing on pavement is kind of tricky because the best way to land is to actually set up a foot drag where you come in and kind of slide to a stop to burn off some energy and slow yourself down. If you land on pavement, you can't exactly do that because your feet will catch. So you've got to be careful about landing on pavement and concrete. It is a little dangerous, and if you go down, it's not going to feel so good. So at first, before you master your landings, I'd probably encourage you to stay away from landing or launching off of blacktop or concrete. As you gain experience, you can work up to that, but you just don't want to mess up on a surface like that. So look for a surface where you can slide, either a gravel road or a sandy beach where you can slide to a stop, or wet grass, or some sort of surface where you can have a little bit of slide to it. It also helps on launch because as you transition from running to flying, it's nice to be able to kind of slip off the ground smoothly. If you have pavement, you have to actually force that transition, and you can't mess up because if your foot catches, it can really screw you up. So be very careful about landing on pavement or concrete as a newer pilot. You got to master those landing techniques first. Salt water and electronics. Salt water and electronics do not go together. So if you're going to do a foot drag in the water, which I don't recommend, but don't do it in the ocean because salt water is conductive. And if you splash salt water on your electronics, your motor could die instantly. Poof! Just like that. Splash in the water. You go down. Be very, very careful about it. The other thing is if you do go in the water, salt water is horrible. It gets everywhere inside your muffler and it's a pain in the butt. Stay away from the frickin' salt water. If you want to obey rule 1, which is don't go near the water, but if you choose to disobey that, at least do it with fresh water. Because the other thing is if you choke on salt water, it stings much worse than fresh water. So if anybody's drowned and can explain how it feels to drown in salt water, it's not as fun as drowning in fresh water.
Talk about planning ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, salt water on your electronics, bad. wind, it can corrode them. Now, another thing is, you splash some salt water on your electronics, and your motor runs just fine, and then all of a sudden, a week later, boom, it stops running. Be very careful of salt water on your electronics. It'll corrode them and cause them to fail. Just normal water is bad enough, but salt water, ooh, not good. Okay, props stop when they hit water. If you're doing a foot drag and your prop touches the water, you're done. It's over. You're toast. You're not getting out of that. Because the second your prop hits the water, it will immediately slow down and the drag will stop it. So, you know, if you're getting near the water, this is kind of an advanced thing, but if you're doing a foot drag, you got to make sure you keep your prop as far from the water as possible. You want to, if you're doing a foot drag on water, which you should not do, but if you decide to ignore that, here are some things to make it easier. One, you want to get completely out of your seat and hang your leg as far down below you and behind you as possible. For several reasons. For one, your foot dragging on the water will give you a larger gauge of distance of fudge factor and margin for error. So if you can hang your foot 2 feet below the motor, it gives you a lot more distance for margin of error. I see some people try and do a foot drag while seated and they just kind of stick their foot out in front of them and they don't seem to realize their skids are only 2 inches from the water. And the second you hit the water, you're going in the water. Now, another thing about doing foot drags on the water, which you should never do, but if you're going to ignore that, do it with the wind. This sounds very strange because you should not be flying with the wind over the dirt. You would normally fly into the wind so you're going as slow as possible. If you're going to do a foot drag on water, you go with the wind because the speed is your friend. If you go into the wind and drag your foot in the water, your foot will sink into the water and create an enormous amount of drag, which will drag your butt into the water. If you do it with the wind and get your speed going as fast as possible, let your trims all the way out, accelerate to full speed, and hit, 30 miles an hour or so, then you'll actually be able to walk on water. A barefoot water skier can basically walk on water at about 35 to 40 miles an hour. So if you go with the wind at fast trim, you'll be able to almost stand on the water. So if you hit some sink and start sinking into the water, you can basically put your body weight onto your foot and stand up and prevent your prop from hitting the water and prevent your motor from sinking into the water. So if you're going to walk on water, do it with the wind, not into the wind, and accelerate, let your trims all the way up so that you can skim across the surface as fast as possible, which you're not supposed to do anyway because you're a freaking idiot if you do it over the water. Okay.
How long did it take you to do it over the water?
How long did it take me to do it over the water? Before you go attempting what you should never attempt, you want to make sure you practice your foot drag on land until it's perfect. When you can foot drag around in circles on the grass and, up and over a hill and down a ditch and up the other side and maintain a perfect foot drag, then maybe attempt it on water. But make sure you master your foot drag on dirt, grass, sand, something other than water. Because if you screw up on water, you go splash. And if you don't have a flat top, don't go anywhere near the water because you have a very high odds of dying. I would say you probably have a 60-70% chance of dying if you go in the water and you don't have a flat top. With a flat top, well, nobody's ever died because you have a quick release harness, you can get out, but you still have danger there, so you got to use your head. You're taking a big risk messing around with that. But if you do, go with the wind or ask questions. Okay, speed system dangers. All right, the way a paraglider works for acceleration is decreasing angle of attack. Your trim tabs are on the back side of your risers. When you let the trims out, they let up the rear of the glider, decreasing your angle of attack, allowing you to fly faster. Your speed bar are the pulleys and line system on the front of the risers. When you push speed bar, it pulls down the front of the glider, again, decreasing the angle of attack, allowing you to fly faster. If you let up the rear of the riser and pull down the front of the glider, you're going to accelerate the glider as fast as possible. If you have a good, well-built glider, when they put trim tabs on them, they decrease the amount the speed bar pulls the pulleys so that you can actually use full speed bar and full fast trim at the same time. For like on the K2, you can hit full speed bar and full fast trim at the same time to fully accelerate it. On some gliders, if you do that wrong, you can screw yourself up royally. So you got to be very, very careful with the speed system. Now, another thing about the speed system, remember, is we're decreasing the angle of attack. If you decrease the angle of attack with a cloth glider, you increase your probability of a collapse because it has less distance to go and less pressure to actually go to a negative angle of attack where your glider can collapse. So if you're going to use your speed system, you would generally use that at higher altitudes in smoother air to accelerate and go faster. You want to be very careful about using your speed system close to the ground. On many gliders, even a certified glider, using the trim tabs can completely decertify your glider. So you could have a DHV1 beginner glider, and if you let those trim tabs out, the safety level goes out the window. All of a sudden, your super safe glider becomes a nightmare death trap because of the trim tabs. There's videos on YouTube showing people take a collapse with the trims out that they would not have taken with the trims down. Plus, with the trims out, it doesn't recover the way a certified glider is designed to recover. So you've got to be very, very careful using trim tabs. The difference between the trim tabs and the speed bar is the speed bar you have to hold on. So if you were to take a collapse, you can immediately let off the speed bar and return the glider to trim speed so that it can accelerate in its safest mode.
What's the speed bar?
The speed bar is what will attach. I will have to probably have to show you that one.
Is that what you use with your feet?
Yeah, the speed bar is the bar that you use with your feet.
And you lock it out and it drops it down.
You push it forward and it pulls down the leading edge of the glider. So there's a bar that you push that's connected to two lines that go up to your risers and decreases the angle of attack when you push it.
What would be the point of using that?
Speed.
You accelerate the glider with the speed system.
And why would you do that? Why would you?
If you want to fly faster, you could accelerate the glider. So say a typical glider has a normal trim speed of 25 miles an hour. If you let the trims out, that same glider might now fly 30 miles an hour. If you hit your speed bar as well, that same glider might now do 35 miles an hour. So you dramatically increase the speed at which the glider flies. So the speed bar is very handy depending on the scenario, but it also comes with dangers, and you have to understand the dangers of using that speed system.
And like, what's...
What? Well, the risers come with the speed bar and trim tabs depending on what type of glider that you purchase. The speed bar Some gliders actually come with the speed bar. Some gliders don't come with the speed bar, and it comes with the harness. And or you can purchase speed bars separately for as little as $35 to $80 depending on the system and the design of the system. A speed bar is the safest way to accelerate your glider because you have to hold pressure to keep the system accelerated. That means if you take a collapse, you just release the pressure and it immediately returns to trim speed, which is the safest configuration of your glider. The trim tabs actually accelerate the glider and lock the glider into accelerated mode. So if you take a collapse, the glider is now trying to recover while partially accelerated. So the speed bar is safer, but the trim tabs are easier because you don't have to hold pressure, which, tires out your legs. It's like doing, a squat and holding it there the whole time you're accelerated. So the trim tabs are much easier, but they're not as safe as the speed bar.
And they use those for ridge flying or whatever, or something like that in typical paragliding?
No, you wouldn't really use a speed system for ridge soaring because it's not something you would use close to the ground. The speed system is more designed for if you get up high and want to accelerate and go for a long distance. You can actually accelerate the glider. Like a cross-country pilot might use it if you're flying through sinking air, you can accelerate and get through it more quickly. And then when you get to a thermal and rising air, you would deaccelerate and actually add some brake so that you are in the rising air a longer period of time and spend less time in sinking air. So you can accelerate and slow down to maximize your amount of lift, and that's what cross-country pilots generally use it for. Or you're in a race, so you're trying to accelerate and get to the goal as fast as possible. Any other questions on that one?
K2s didn't come with any of that, did they?
The K2 is really slick because it actually comes with motorizers, which have both the trim tabs and the speed system for no extra charge. Most gliders, like the U-turn gliders, you would have to purchase the motorizer separately, which would be, up to another couple $100 to purchase the motorizers.
And maybe I just don't know how to use this stuff.
It's on there. We'll show it to you when we're actually doing it in person. We'll show you how to use the speed system and how all that works.